to mute their microphone when not speaking. You should unmute your microphone only when you're given the floor. And if you have a request for the floor, of course, do it in the chat. Some people have already requested the floor, so we have already recorded that. I would encourage, of course, everyone to be succinct and not to take too much time. Now, I immediately give the floor to Mr. President to kick off the meeting. Mr. President, your camera is not on. Please turn on your camera and your microphone, and you can go ahead. Your microphone, Mr. President. Okay, good. Go ahead now.
Now it's okay. Now it's okay. Well, dear friends, great to see again all of you on the screen. Thank you, Roberto, and thanks to all our members for joining us online. Of course, let me first extend my best wishes of good health to you, your families, your close ones, and hope for a speedy and full recovery of all those contaminated by the spread of COVID. We see that in many countries we still have quite high figures of this infection. As we are doing always, we are greeting our new colleagues, new members of Standing Committee, and let me greet in particular Mr. Gareth Johnson from United Kingdom, who joins us and joins our Standing Committee meeting for the first time. So while we should have concluded today our annual session in Vancouver, and our dear Heidi Fry would host us with the delegation and Canadian authorities, I think this is important that we have taken the time today to meet remotely before our parliaments begin summer recess. And before we proceed with our agenda, please note that in accordance with the Rule 7.1 of our Rules of Procedure, it is up to the President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly to preside over meetings of the Assembly and guide our debates. For technical reasons, I will ask Secretary General Roberto Montella to moderate parts of the meeting from Copenhagen to ensure that all participants wishing to take the floor are indeed recognized. An agenda for this meeting, dear colleagues, has been distributed, and I will first deliver some remarks on the work of our Assembly in these unprecedented times, and then I'll give the floor to Treasurer Peter Jensen, and he will be followed by Secretary General Roberto Montella for an update on OSCE activities. And we will then open the floor for a debate on the work of the Parliamentary Assembly in recent months, and of course after the summer. And then we will hear a very important presentation by Vice President Peter Bonis on reforms to our rules of procedure. And Deputy Secretary General and Special Representative Ambassador Montella will also give us an update on the work of the OSCE and of the Parliamentary Assembly Liaison Office. So then I think I will directly then get straight into the first point on our agenda. I think, Roberto, it's directly I'm going to my report now. It's nothing to add at this time, at this moment, as I understand. Okay. Then dear colleagues, as you know, the first point in our agenda, it's my report, and I'd like to share some thoughts on how the Parliamentary Assembly has faced the disruptions brought by the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. First, I'd like to thank you all for your continued active engagement in our work and our mission, be it through informal online chats or through your participation in our Parliamentary Web Dialogues. I was also able to exchange in greater detail with a number of delegations through regional phone calls. And I think this was a useful exercise to highlight some specific issues that could be solved through closer international cooperation. In fact, as we have experienced throughout this crisis, there is a dire need for more international consultation. We need more dialogue between our countries, and we need to reinforce our multilateral system. It really is a paradox, while every recent crisis has demonstrated the unmatched value of the OSCE. It's versatile, able to act rapidly and extremely cost effective. And it has been used as an opportunity to undermine our organization. Our executive structures now find themselves in a complicated situation regarding the renewal of the terms of OSCE heads of institution. We hope that the Albanian chairmanship can succeed in this very complicated task and ensure that our organization does not suffer from a leadership crisis. In contrast, and in advance of the remarks by Peter Janssen, I must thank all our delegations for recently approving our 2020-21 budget. And I believe that our budget approval process has been straightforward, not only because of Parliamentary Assembly continues to operate in a very cost-effective manner, but mainly because the PA has continued to be an inclusive forum for dialogue, for exchange, even in this challenging period. Despite the postponement of important conferences planned by several delegations, for instance, on anti-corruption in Cyprus, on oversight in Armenia, on economic cooperation in Turkey, and autonomy in Moldova, to name just a few. And of course, the cancellation of our annual session in Vancouver and our upcoming autumn meeting in San Marino, we have managed to maintain dialogue by readapting our work and moving our discussions online. I want to thank Secretary General Roberto Montella. I did it many times during this month, and our staff for managing this transition, making the necessary investments in terms of equipment and software, which was important. And although our core mission calls for in-person debates, maintaining some online meetings could perhaps bring an added value to our work in the future. Our online discussions have been extremely valuable to exchange on the challenges stemming from the COVID pandemic, while keeping focus on core OSCE issues, and heightening tensions across the OSCE region and restrictions to freedom of movement have seriously complicated the daily lives of civilians living in conflict zones in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Nagorno-Karabakh, and in Moldova, and threaten to roll back progress. This is why it is so important to keep such issues high on our political agenda. These web dialogues have again demonstrated that there is a considerable PA acquis and expertise for many of the challenges that have been made more pervasive by this crisis. I'm talking about issues such as human trafficking, disinformation, corruption, intolerance, or gender inequalities, all of which are addressed by an OSCE special representative. And our ad hoc committees have also placed us well to discuss the plight of refugees and migrants, which has been made worse, unfortunately, by the pandemic, and continue to counter increased risks of radicalization and terrorism. We will soon release a comprehensive report of the activities that have taken place in the past 3 months or 4 months already. All of these are resources that our delegations and our national parliaments can rely to exchange experiences, learn about best practices, and together promote a more comprehensive response to our challenges. Our online events also serve to continue our excellent cooperation with the OSCE Secretariat and institutions, as well as field operations. We were honored to host the Chairman in Office, Prime Minister Rama, our Secretary General of OSCE, Thomas Greminger, ODIHR Director, Gisladopir, and Ambassador Zanier, to provide expert contributions in our meetings. And we also included relevant field missions in our regional discussions. We always had a very high-level experts from different fields. Maintaining these channels of dialogue with the OSCE contributed to receiving up-to-date information and craft coordinated responses to specific concerns that have arisen during this period. One of my priorities as president of the PA has also been to better position us in the international arena by expanding partnerships with other multilateral organizations. And I'm glad that despite the difficult circumstances, we were able to continue this work by organizing a webinar, for instance, with the Parliamentary Assembly of Mediterranean and the UN Office of Counterterrorism just last week. This proved to be a very good opportunity to exchange with many parliamentarians from the southern shore of the Mediterranean on common security challenges and on the increased threats of terrorism in particular. Early in this crisis, I also issued a joint statement with the president of PACE and of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, where we underlined the important role parliaments must continue to play. And it was also pleased to take part, was really a very good exercise to take part in online events organized by the House of Lords and the Interparliamentary Union, also recently event in Azerbaijan in Parliament. And going forward, we need to continue strengthening these partnerships to fully exploit our distinct advantages and thus make the best use of our precious time and your precious time. Dear colleagues, as I mentioned earlier in the opening, today would have been the final day of our Vancouver annual session. This would have meant that today we would elect new officers of our assembly and I would have stepped down as your president. And as you already know, the cancellation of our annual session has led to a prolongation of the term in office of our bureau until our next annual session. This is truly an unprecedented situation based on our rules procedure, but I'm glad that we found a common understanding thanks to frequent discussions among our Assembly's leadership and advice from Secretariat and Secretary General and his team. And I think the situation encourages us to continue reforming the rules of procedure to modernize our working practices and close the loopholes that have been exposed by the pandemic. I look forward to the report by Vice President Bonis on this issue later in our agenda, and I hope that the coming months will serve to find amendments that could be agreed when our standing committee next meets in person in Vienna in February 2021. I'm of course hoping for some form of normalcy for our activities in the autumn. We are currently planning on the violence seminar hosted by Doris Barnett, and which has been rescheduled to October, being our first in-person activity. We had also expected a busy election observation year. A few weeks ago, Serbia held parliamentary elections. Next week, it will be early parliamentary elections in North Macedonia, and next month, presidential elections in Belarus. In normal terms and normal times, these are elections for which we would have deployed an observation mission. However, as the coronavirus continues to impact both our ability to travel freely and avoid mandatory periods of isolation, and our ability to observe elections as usual due to social distancing guidelines, this has so far proven to be impossible. However, I'm convinced that it is essential that parliamentarians take part in this exercise, and we may need to find innovative ways to ensure our continued participation later this year. And I also look forward to your thoughts on this issue. I take this opportunity of my mention on elections in Serbia to note that Ms. Stefana Miladenovic, head of the Serbian delegation and special rapporteur on the digital agenda, is unfortunately no longer a member of the PA. This is also the case for our special representative of Southeast Europe, Mark Pritchard, United Kingdom. And I'd like to warmly welcome them and once again to thank them for their contributions over many years in our assembly. This brings me to my last point in this report. Our Parliamentary Assembly is an invaluable human network, and all our members are deeply attached to the spirit of the OSCE and its mission. Unfortunately, political life is such that membership in the PA can be abruptly, even though members may have been valued experts in their field or in positions of leadership. It is important not to lose the value of MPs who are no longer in office. And this is why I have been pushing for the establishment of an association of former members of the OSCE. In April, we met with former PA presidents to discuss ways we can best harness this expertise. It was upon invitation of the President and Secretary General, and of course to support the work of the PA. This is the main goal. I want to thank Ambassador Notella for his support on this project, and I hope to be able to report on more concrete steps after the summer. So this concludes my report. I know that it was a little bit long, and should you have any questions or comments, I would ask that this be made during our open debate after the report by the Treasurer and the Secretary General. So thank you very much for your patience and attention. So,
Mr. President, you want to give the floor to our Treasurer? Okay, Peter.
I announced from the beginning, but
okay, go ahead.
To ask for Treasurer Peter Juliansen to take the floor and to let's say provide with the information about his activities. I'm sorry, maybe my microphone was switched off. Where is Peter? Now Peter Stan, Peter Jensen, our Treasurer, floor is yours now.
I think he was struggling with his microphone, and probably in an effort to turn on his microphone, he's logged himself out. Let's be patient a second until he logs in again.
If but Peter is online. I
yeah, no, he was online, and I could see that he was struggling with his trying to turn on his microphone. So probably he has clicked on the wrong button and he's logged himself out. I'm sure he's gonna turn on again soon.
Despite of so many exercises online, it's still a little bit difficult.
So far, it's been good, I must say. Some little disruptions, but it's always gone smooth. So let's wait for Peter to.
Peter. So we need you and we need budgets. Hey, Roberto, maybe.
Yeah. I would not dare speaking before the Treasurer.
No, I think if there are some technical constraints there, then I think you can start, and Peter will join us later.
Oh.
Okay, there he is. Peter?
Not, cannot connect. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. I had some troubles with my microphone. Thank you, Mr. President, and dear colleagues. Nice to see you all. And of course, greetings from Denmark. Not warm greetings, because the weather here in Denmark is not so warm. So it's a bit cold greetings. Thank you to you, Mr. President, for calling this meeting. It is very important that we, the Standing Committee, maintain our engagement despite the current circumstances. I'm sorry that we cannot meet in Vancouver, but let me take this opportunity to thank Hedda Fry and the whole Canadian Parliament for all their efforts. I hope we can meet in Canada in the near future. I will be brief because you know my motto, time is money. I'm very happy that the Standing Committee has approved the budget I proposed for our next financial year, which will start on October the 1st. Thank you for your support. The Assembly's new budget has been prepared in these exceptional circumstances, in close cooperation with the Secretary General Montala and in consultation with the Bureau, to reflect the minimum basic needs of the Assembly in order to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Assembly's budget for the 29th financial year will reflect that money saved in our current budget automatically will reduce the amounts of all the national delegations' annual contributions, as earlier decided. An official letter from me to all of you regarding the annual contributions will be circulated as customary by Deputy General Gustavo Paladas in the coming days. I conclude by stressing the words of our President. The Parliamentary Assembly has always functioned and continues to function in an extremely cost-effective and efficient way. Thanks for the support, commitment, and solidarity of all national delegations, and thanks to Gustavo and all his helpers. Thank you, and very good summer to all of you.
Thank you very much, dear Peter, for your work, and I absolutely agree with you that our staff, and especially Gustavo and others, they deserve, of course, very good and kind words from the leadership. Thank you again. And now I'd like to ask our Secretary General, Roberto Montella, to offer his remarks and to share his very important and valuable information. Thank you, Roberto, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. When I had to clear this letter that President Serratelli and Eddie Fry sent to the entire Standing Committee about the cancellation of Vancouver, that was for me, I must confess, the saddest moment since I was elected Secretary General. It's unprecedented, of course, that an annual session gets cancelled, also that the autumn meeting doesn't take place. So that was really a vulnus that kind of traumatized for a few days the work here of the Secretariat, especially also when we had to decide to close offices in Copenhagen and Vienna. But I think we soon recovered from this trauma, and I think in the last 4 months we must congratulate ourselves because we've really done something that is great. So first of all, I would like to congratulate all the members for the engagement that you've had during these 4 months. And I would like to congratulate all the staff of the Secretariat, and especially the newcomers. Those have also helped us become a little bit more technologically advanced. I mean, we all entered into this new world, and a lot of help we've received from those who were former interns who have now started the work here at the Secretariat. So thank you very much for all the staff, and also the secretaries of delegations have also supported us a lot. I think we've, one of the main things that we said back then is it was very important to keep the parliamentary dialogue alive. This was our main motto when we decided what can we do in absence of an annual session. And I think we've done just that. We've had this idea of developing parliamentary web dialogues, which are different from webinars. Many people call them webinars, but webinars are seminars of 2-3 experts that kind of lecture a crowd, and the crowd listens, maybe asks a few questions, but it's mainly the experts who speak to a crowd. Here, what we did was, let's say, webinars in Parliamentary Assembly souls, let's say, Parliamentary Assembly web dialogues, because it's parliamentarians talking to each other, parliamentarians sharing their experiences, and not just being lectured by somebody, but giving their indications, their proposals, their suggestions. And I think we were very successful in hitting all the main aspects that were connected to the COVID-19 pandemic. We discussed about economic security fallout, human rights and democratic control during the state of emergencies. That was very important, you know, parliamentary control over and oversight over the governments. The impact on conflicts, we had very good seminar on that. The environment, refugees and migrants. I congratulate also Margareta, who has been keeping on doing this also yesterday and last Friday. On gender, we had an excellent webinar on gender, social cohesion and diversities, countering terrorism. This was a very good webinar, also including UN and Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. And on climate change and corruption, we are planning to do 2 of these still online webinars in September, October. So I think the entire spectrum of our activities has been dealt with and has been focused on by us. And I think we should be proud of the work that we've done. All this work will be part of a policy paper that we will issue sometimes either tomorrow or in the coming days. It's a policy paper emanating from the President, as I've said several times. The Secretariat, of course, has helped put together summaries of all these webinars. It's not a substitute for the annual declaration, of course, and it's not a document that is subject to any vote or any approval, but it's a policy paper kind of the message of the president in this COVID phase. And I think you will like the document. I think it's a very good synthesis of all the activities that we have conducted, and I'm very proud of the activities we have conducted. I think we've also kept the parliamentary dialogue alive in different formats. We've had some conference calls with countries in Central Asia, in Southeast Europe, in the Caucasus. We spoke to the microstates. We had a very good conference call with microstates because, as we've always said in the Parliamentary Assembly, they're not only big states, they're also small states, and every state counts one in the Parliamentary Assembly. We had also, besides the microstates, discussions with bigger states. We had the Russian Federation and Mongolia phone calls, and also with Belarus. So more or less we covered those countries which are, let's say, east of Vienna, which are the ones we normally operate more. But one thing that we've learned from this pandemic is that the selfish recipe doesn't work. What we've learned is that the only way to deal with challenges like the ones we have, the health crisis, but also the other ones, terrorism, and one's movement of people or climate change, requires a recipe which is cooperation, which is collaboration, which is exactly what we do. So we need to enter more into the idea that we can only solve our problems through cooperation and collaboration with each other. The necessity that comes out of this crisis is that we need to strengthen multilateral organization like ours. Only these problems can be solved outside our borders and not inward looking. But the added value of the Parliamentary Assembly, and this is something I would like to underline, is that it is a little more than what governments have done in cooperating with each other. Governments, of course, present their position from their perspective, but and protect their national interests. But parliamentarians who participate in a multilateral organization like ours can do a little step forward, and that is to try to reach out to the parliamentarians of another countries and create a sense of community. And I can sense this sense of community in the Parliamentary Assembly. The President talked about, and we'll get there, to the Association of Former Parliamentarians. I mean, you can see that there is a network of parliamentarians that goes beyond the simple defense of our national interests here. So I want to treasure this relationship that you have created among yourselves and try to more and more in the future focus on how we can build confidence and trust between ourselves, and this will then project also at the level of governments. But also we have to use this platform to think strategically. One thing that we've learned, especially when we talk about movement of people, but climate change, is that these issues cannot be dealt with the idea of the next poll or the next election cycle or how many likes I have on Facebook. You have to deal with these issues with a very long-term strategy of what is the world in 50 years from now. Now, I know from any politicians, well, I have to be re-elected. I cannot think of what is it going to be in 50 years from now. I mean, I need to propose policies that get me elected at the next election. That's true. But in the Parliamentary Assembly, we can maybe also, when we work with each other, try to think a little bit more strategically. And when we produce our papers, our proposals, also think of how we can propose to governments solutions to the problems we have, which are beyond the electoral cycle. In terms of election observation missions, the President mentioned a little bit, we had to unfortunately cancel the election observation mission in Serbia and the one in Northern Macedonia, which is taking place next weekend. And unfortunately, we will not be able to observe the elections in Belarus. But however, we appreciate that the Belarusian authorities will invite ODIHR. I think the ODIHR will at least deploy a small mission in Minsk. I think am I connected? I think our next election will be most probably, okay, all right, continue. The next election alone, what is connecting, can we mute alone? Angelica, mute alone, she's just connecting now. Sorry about that. So our next election in person that we're planning is the one in Montenegro. I've been in touch with Diana and with the president of the parliamentary, the speaker of the parliament. We are planning an election observation in Macedonia the way we've known it. However, there are many ifs, of course. If we can travel to the region, if enough countries have do not have travel restrictions, if all the security measures are in place, distancing measures are in place, but we have started at the Secretariat to start planning for this possibility of an in-person election observation mission on the 30th of August in Podgorica and somewhere in the regions of Montenegro. The next one we are planning in a classical, let's say, OSCE format is the elections in Kyrgyzstan on the 4th of October, the one in Georgia on the 31st of October, the one in Moldova on the 1st of November. So we'll have 3 elections at the same time, and you will appreciate how much these challenges are, election department. But Georgia on the 31st of October, Moldova on the 1st of November, presidential elections, and then, of course, on the 3rd of November, the US elections. So we'll try to plan and work on the assumptions that we can do a classical election observation missions. As I've always said in these occasions, anybody who makes predictions for the future can be proven wrong the day after. So I'm not going to make any predictions on whether this will happen or not. I hope and work towards that direction. But of course, we need to keep a big caveat here that if the situation gets worse or if travel restrictions are in place, we'll have to review this. But this is more or less the plan at this time in place. For other activities in the fall, we are planning the first in-person meeting in Leinsweiler in mid-October, where we also hope to discuss issues of the elections in Donbass. And that's an interesting seminar that we will do there with experts from Russia, from Ukraine, but also from France and Germany. And then, of course, our next statutory meeting will be the Bureau meeting that will take place at the periphery of the ministerial meeting in December in Tirana. So the early December in Tirana will be there for the Bureau meeting. As far as I'm concerned, I'm meeting tomorrow with the acting foreign minister of Albania, who's visiting Denmark and then Sweden, who is the incoming chair. So he will visit us in the office here. This will actually be the first in-person meeting that we will have here in Copenhagen after a while. And next week, I will brief the Swedish task force who will take over the chairmanship from 1st of January. This is more or less what I have to report now. I have 2 other points that I will make on the OSCE reforms in general and on the appointments of the heads of missions, heads of institutions in Vienna. But I will not preempt Lord Bournes and Ambassador Notello will talk about these first. So I will let them first make their remarks, and then I will step in once they talk about that. So this concludes my report, Mr. President. And as you said, I will now take over chairing the meeting, and I will open the floor for anybody who has anything to say or ask to the 3 reports, or simply to make a presentation. And the first speaker is Mr. Gerasimov from Ukraine. Artur, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. President, dear Mr. Secretary General, dear colleagues, first of all, I'm very pleased to see you. And I would like to start with the words of the gratitude to the International Secretariat for the organization of the webinars. And as Roberto told, this was not just common webinars, it was real parliamentarian dialogue between parliamentarians. And I want also to say thank you for all the members for their participation and contributions. And I think it's a very good idea and very good way to cover correctly the areas of our 3 committees during the COVID-19 pandemic. I would like also to express my gratitude to the OSCE member states, first of all, United States and EU member states, for their humanitarian aid to Ukraine in counteracting with COVID-19 and combating the consequences of the flooding in the west of Ukraine. You know, we had very big flooding, the biggest in the last 50 years in the west of Ukraine. And on my conviction, in this turbulent period, our state should pay special attention to the economic sustainability, protecting jobs, attracting investments, creation of a special stabilization funds to combat COVID-19, and supporting healthcare sector. And more than ever, we should not forget about very good initiatives, by the way, like Silk Road, Why I'm telling about that? Because only yesterday in Ukraine we welcomed the arrival to Kiev of the first train from Wuhan. And investing in time of crisis and potential the most profitable investing in the time of crisis is potentially the most profitable, and it can bring not only investment returns but also a significant rise in the value of assets after the economic situation has normalized. Also, I believe that economic growth is impossible without stable security situation in the OSCE region. I would like to underline that security situation in our OSCE region is marked by ongoing blatant violations of international law and OSCE norms and principles enshrined in the Helsinki Final Act and the Paris Charter. Russian Federation seems is completely ignoring the much call of the UN Secretary General Guterres for full and comprehensive ceasefire in order to consolidate against COVID-19 pandemic. Colleagues, only in March-June, Ukraine lost 24 its servicemen killed in action. We observed persistent violation of the international law and human rights, and more than 100 citizens of Ukraine remain detained by Russia under politically motivated reasons on the territory of Russia and the occupied Crimea. And we still observe persistent militarization of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, as well as parts of the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. And also, as you know, the environmental situation on the occupied Donbass is characterized by numerous risks resulting from military aggression, termination of production at most industrial enterprises, reduced attention to waste management, pollutant emissions, shutdown and large-scale flooding of numerous mines. And in current situation, we can't move on resolving of these problems. Also, I want to pay your attention that all these months we observed the restriction of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission access to the temporarily occupied territories. I strongly believe it's unacceptable because we should know what happens on the ground. And in the end, I want just to say that we need to remain very, very united in defense of international law, even more than before the pandemic. Thank you very much for your attention. I want to be quite short. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Artur. And now I give the floor to Michael Link from Germany, if he's connected. I don't see him in the list, but maybe he's connected through. If he's not, then we'll go to Link later, and then we go to Senator Cardin.
Well, first, I wanted to thank and congratulate our President and our Secretary General for their incredible work of adapting our organization to COVID-19. I've participated in many of the forums. We have been very relevant, and you have stepped up to this crisis, and we congratulate you and we're proud of your leadership. As the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly Special Representative on Anti-Semitism, Racism, and Intolerance, I have focused my work on addressing anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim bigotry, discriminatory policing, and racism, xenophobia impacting migrants and refugee populations. These issues are more important than ever and warrant the attention of all of us. And Mr. President, as you pointed out in your opening comments, the work that you've done here to underscore the importance of our commitments. My written report circulated to you focuses on a number of activities I've engaged in since July of last year to address these concerns, from working to secure U.S. funding to support ODIHR's efforts to address anti-Semitism, racism, and other forms of intolerance across the OSCE region, to introducing legislation to reform police departments in America and rebuild trust between police officers and the communities they are sworn to protect and serve. There are many other areas of long-standing systemic racism and inequality that must also be addressed, including restoring voting rights to those who have served their time and have been released from incarceration. Our concerns must be not only what is happening in other states, but what is happening in our own state and our compliance with our Helsinki commitments. In that regard, I want to acknowledge and thank our chair of the Helsinki Commission, Congressman Hastings, for holding hearings in regards to how we're doing in the United States. The tragic death of George Floyd in America and other African Americans have led to a review in Congress of policing and the legacies of transatlantic slave trade and colonialism as they continue to impact us today. I also want to acknowledge Heidi Fry of Canada for her contribution to this debate in the United States. Given that bias policing is a problem impacting minority populations throughout the OSCE region, the Parliamentary Assembly should work with the High Commissioner on National Minorities to develop methods to address fair policing throughout the OSCE region. To address the structural racism and discrimination that has limited the health and wealth of people of color, leaving them especially vulnerable to COVID-19, I've worked with colleagues on targeting responses for diverse communities. As parliamentarians, we have a responsibility to the citizens we represent to ensure the ability to vote during the pandemic for populations that may be more at risk when voting in person. The Parliamentary Assembly should work with ODIHR to encourage this among the participating states. Additionally, I call on you to join me as leaders in addressing the propaganda that scapegoats Asians, Jews, Roma, migrants, and others during these troubling times. My report details many efforts that many parliamentarians have engaged in to address these issues. However, we must do more to address the decades of practices that have sought to divide our society and harm our democracies. It's an honor to serve as your special representative, and I thank you for the support I've received from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly.
Thank you very much, Senator Cardin, and I give the floor to Vice President Margareta Cederfelt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. I would also like to thank and congratulate our President, Secretary General, and all the members of the OSCE Secretariat for their excellent work and leadership during this crisis. And I think it's been essential. During the COVID-19, I would first like to say that it's a very difficult situation for all those people who have lost their families, friends, and as well those who have lost their job according to the pandemic. As you all know, maybe Sweden is one of the countries that's most affected by the COVID-19, but I must underline that we are performing and working forward, and we have just started to scrutinize how the program have gone far, and also try to improve and do even better. And those who have suffered most in Sweden is unfortunately our elderly people. We haven't managed to protect them. But I am very pleased to notice that these days is the number of people who get sick less, as well as those who need special care and those who die from COVID-19. And I'm so grateful for this, because we need to move further on, and we shouldn't lose any more lives. I would also like to mention that during this COVID-19, it has shown the need of international cooperation, the multilateralism. We are all affected in the countries in some way, and the only way for us to move forward is through cooperation. In the ad hoc committee on migration, we have worked very well during this period, and I would also like to thank Ms. Farima Daftari for her contribution and excellent work with us in the committee. And for the last 2 days, as Roberto Montella said, we have met with the European Commission. Normally we go there in person, but this time it has been through internet, and it has worked out very well. I would first like to underline that the situation in Syria is getting worse, and I think the rest of the world should notify the work that has been done in Greece, Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan for their contribution and availability to rescue people. But there need to be more cooperation, and I am quite sure and look forward to the pact between the European countries, because the Dublin agreement didn't work, but there is a need for agreement between the countries in Europe. And we have particular focused on women and unaccompanied minors, as they are the most vulnerable. But I would also like to say, when it's a pandemic like the COVID-19, there is the need, as I said, for international cooperation, but there is also a need for us, as we have done, keep focus on our traditional duties. I think here about the Helsinki Agreement. That's our base, the fundament for our work. And here I would like to underline democracy. Quite a lot of our member countries have difficulties with democracy during the corona. And I think it's important that they get the support that they can get, because the parliamentarian work is sometimes more difficult than others when it comes to the pandemic like this. I would also like to underline what my colleague Artur Gerasimov said about the UN Secretary General, the request for ceasefire. And I am very disappointed when I read the reports from the mission in the OSCE mission in Ukraine, and noticed that there is no ceasefire. The Russian violation in the southeast is still going on. The Crimea is still occupied. And I think it's important that we do all our best to find a way that Ukraine right to its territorium could be respected, because this is in line with the Helsinki Act. And I would also like to congratulate all my colleagues for the work that we have done together with the web dialogues. I think it has been fruitful and a good way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Sederfeld and Margareta. And now I give the floor to Mr. Poturayev from Ukraine, head of delegation. You have the floor.
Distinguished colleagues, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, I'm very glad to see you all in good health, first of all, and wish you all to be in good health till we win this pandemic. But I would like to continue the story that was touched by previous colleague, and to stop in a few words on the situation with the Osce SMM monitors. After more than 3 months of Russia imposed restrictions on the crossing of contact line in Donbass for civilians and Osce SMM monitors, the monitoring mission is now facing the most serious challenges to its activities. New observers cannot enter Russia-occupied parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, as they will be subjected to 2 weeks quarantine. Due to these, since the beginning of those restrictions, the number of SMM monitors in the occupied parts of Donbass has decreased 4-fold, from 200 to only 50. We strongly condemn and consider unacceptable the restrictions of the SMM access to the temporary occupied parts of Donbass imposed by Russian occupation administration in the end of March under the pretext of preventive measures against the spread of coronavirus. Such actions totally undermine the implementation of the SMM's mandate. The dire situation caused by Russia's illegal actions not only severely undermines the SMM monitoring capacities, but also puts under risk personal safety of the international observers sent to the mission by the OSCE participating states. From the administrative point, the SMM now cut in 3 different parts between the government-controlled areas, the occupied parts of Donetsk region, and the occupied parts of Luhansk region. This has been clearly stated by Chief Monitor Sevik in his addresses to the delegations in Vienna during the informal briefings. We call on participating states to raise this problematic issue with Russia, both bilaterally and within all available international fora. We call on the parliaments of participating states to use available tools of parliamentary diplomacy to persuade Russia's leadership that the time has come to cease fire in Donbass and guarantee unrestricted access for the OSCE, SMM, and international humanitarian organizations to the temporarily occupied parts of Ukraine. And now I put my notes away and add only a couple of words. We all know that epidemic situation in Russian Federation is terrible. But according to the information that we have from occupied parts of Ukraine, the situation, epidemic situation with the coronavirus there is not even terrible, it's horrible. And what do occupation administration do for all these people? Do they help them with medicine? Do they help them with medical services? No, they help them with Russian passports. They gave already up to 300,000 passports. What for? To use all these people to vote for the changes to their constitution. And we, that in Minsk format and in Normandy format, we propose these solutions again and again. And what do we hear? Instead, we hear that we have to change our constitution. We also have we could have some proposals to change some other laws in Russian Federation, but we don't do it because we want to find this solution for this conflict. And as I promised you during our last meeting, the special book is prepared about secret prisons in Donbass and people, 22 evidences here collected of people who were tortured in these secret prisons. This book also will be prepared in English and German. And I hope that during our next meeting, where we, I'm sure, will meet all together face to face, I will be glad to present you these evidences. Thank you very much, and hope that you will, that we will all be united in our common fight for peace in Donbass and the occupation of Crimea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikita. And now I give the floor to Congressman Hudson. Richard, yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, it's great to see all of you, all my dear colleagues. Like so many others have expressed, I wish we were doing this in person. I definitely miss the engagement and interaction with each of you, but it's excellent to have this opportunity to be able to see each other. I hope everyone's in good health. And I just want to reiterate that the United States stands with all participating states as we each deal with this COVID pandemic. I want to thank President Serratelli for your continued strong leadership. Excellent report earlier as usual. Roberto, to you and the Secretariat staff, thanks for the tremendous work you've been doing with this just unprecedented times, incredible challenges. I think the fact that we've had 8 excellent webinars and tremendous participation from all participating states is really a credit to you and your staff for the great work you're doing. So thank you for that. I'm also really pleased that the United States delegation has been able to engage very fully in all the webinars. And our distinguished head of delegation, Mr. Hastings, I see is on the list to speak, so I will not steal his thunder, but I will just point out that we've had U.S. participation in all the webinars, and that's been members of our House and Senate, members of both parties. And I think it shows in a bipartisan way that the United States is as committed as ever to the relationship with all of our OSCE participating state neighbors and the transatlantic relationship in general. I wanted to just briefly mention the webinar we held for the first committee on May 15th. It was an excellent webinar on the pandemic's impact on conflict in the OSCE region. I want to thank Deputy Secretary General Gustavo Piaras for organizing it with my input. Also want to acknowledge my Vice Chair and Rapporteur, who were very instrumental in helping put that together, selecting the speakers and the topics. Appreciate their work. We had 2 very senior officials from the OSCE who painted a concerning picture of conflicts in the region, especially in Ukraine. I'm grateful to all the colleagues who joined the seminar and who emphasized the need for all participating states to fully implement Helsinki Final Act principles. The last thing I'll mention, just sort of responding to the news more recently. You know, and I think what it underscores is that our work in this assembly cannot ignore serious developments that occur in our world. We have at times sought to form common views in OSCE-PA regarding the situation in Afghanistan. Numerous credible news reports suggest that the Russian government may have been providing monetary bounties to Taliban-linked insurgents for the killing of American and possibly NATO soldiers in Afghanistan. The administration and Congress are currently undertaking reviews to better understand these reports and assess their validity. Sadly, these latest reports are made only too credible by their alignment with Russian actions across the OSCE space and beyond that are aimed at destabilizing and undermining the international order by any means necessary, to include violating of other OSCE participating state sovereignty and territorial integrity, the assassination of political opponents abroad, cyber attacks, disinformation, and more. Moreover, it has long been in the public record, including an open testimony in the United States Helsinki Commission as recently as last year, that the Russian government has at a minimum provided weapons and night vision equipment to the Taliban to undermine U.S. and NATO interest. It should go without saying should these allegations be proven true, these allegations suggest completely unacceptable acts that will be treated with the utmost seriousness by our governments to ensure the Kremlin faces the appropriate consequences for its actions. We once again call on Russia to cease these aggressive policies and fulfill the commitments it freely undertook in the Helsinki process. With that, just again, thank you for the opportunity to intervene here, and I wish all of you good health and look forward to our next opportunity to be together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Hudson, dear Richard. Now I give the floor to Vice President Kari Erickson from Norway. Kari, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And I just have to say, like Richard, it's very nice to see you all. And it reminds me that I missed so much being together with you in person at our meetings. But this is the next best thing to do, meeting in this way. I would just also like to, as many of the other speakers, to say congratulations and thank you very much, both the President, Gigi, and the Secretariat and the staff for organizing all these meetings and web dialogues, as you say, Roberto, who has been very important in our core mission to speak to each other and to reflect on experiences and how we can move on as an fruitful discussion and collaboration, international collaboration organization. So I think that has been very, very good. And as we have, as many of the web and speakers have mentioned in these webinars, the crisis and the COVID-19 situation has been highlighting often underlying challenges in each country and in each region. And I hope this, our work will ensure that the underlying problems and issues that we have to deal with, security issues, rebuilding the economy, human rights, migrant and climate changes, and also gender issues, as we are discussing more later, must not be put at stall and to be not debated because of the health problems, which are severe and which is very important. So these things is linked to each other. We have to recognize the health issue problems, but we also have to see that the health problems that we have also lighten up the underlying challenges. So we have to face both those challenges in a good way. Senator Cardin, I think he has had very good speeches on a very important issue, in my view, is the hatred and the discrimination that are going on also as a result of the crisis, but also as an underlying challenge that now is more in the focus. So I just want to raise something to to discussion, because I think the reports we have had from all the web dialogues and the webinars is very good, and they are informative. But I wonder if there are any possibilities. For instance, in my committee, Kyriakos and Link has been very good in organizing and put important challenges at the table. And I think, is it possible to consider that each committee could, in internet and in mailing and in written, conclude with some very important points of the webinars, which is smaller and more specific than the general reports. I'm not sure if it's possible, but I could think maybe if the head of the delegation, the head of the committee, and the rapporteur and the vice president in the committee could suggest something to discuss in the committee, so that we maybe can have some clear statements from the committees. I don't know if it's possible, and it's not so very long. Hopefully that we will be meeting each other again, and that we can have the ordinary work back on track. But I think it could be important for me also to see what is the most important issues in the other committees. So I think that could be interesting. And the second thing I would like to raise is it possible to get more information from the field operations? Because I think the field operations is very important at these issues. And I also think that could be a good way of informing us on the situation on the ground in the different area of the OSCE mission. When regarding to the gender issue, I will wait we have the discussion after Hedy Fry's report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Erickson. We will take these questions or remarks towards the end. I see that there are more statements than questions, but just to reassure you on one point, the summary of the webinars or parliamentary forum dialogues, this is indeed the document that the President will issue, or the Secretariat will issue. Sometimes towards the end of this week, you will see there exactly a summary of the discussions and a set of recommendations. But we will take questions and answers after that. Now I give the floor to Hedy Fry from Canada. Hedy, your microphone. Yep, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks very much, everybody. As everyone has been saying, it's great to see each other. I know we've been seeing each other a lot over this time because we've had so many webinars and so many dialogues. I just want to congratulate Roberto and George, because their leadership and the creativity in keeping us together and talking to each other during this very difficult time has been exceptional, because I think we've seen each other now, guys, more than we've ever seen each other in any years before. We're seeing each other very regularly, almost twice a month. And that's been extremely good because it's allowed us to share. It's probably connected us in ways that we've never been connected before. Now, I'm not going to give my gender report because I think you all have it. It's a pretty long one, and I gave it just before the gender webinar that we had. But I just wanted to pinpoint that one of the things about this crisis is that what it has done, and it's a terrible crisis, a tragedy of so many people who have died, the number of people who are afraid and isolated and not knowing what's going to happen next. We still don't know what's going to happen with COVID. Is it going to have a second wave? And if so, will it be better? Will it be worse? How will it affect us? But I think what I wanted to talk about is that it has exposed problems. We've seen them. We've seen the vulnerabilities of women who are frontline workers, who are low paid, who are in precarious situations. And so I will just go over that, but we did have a webinar and we talked about that a lot. I wanted to take this opportunity, however, to suggest that we need to look at the opportunities we now have as parliamentarians. I think we need to focus on how we achieve some of the gains that we can from this particular tragedy. I think we need to look at the vulnerabilities we have in all of our countries with regard to people that are either indigenous or because of their race or their gender have been exposed as being very vulnerable. And we need to understand that this vulnerability is not going to go away, but we have an opportunity now that it's been exposed to talk about addressing it. And I'd like to see us talk about how we create strategies to do that. How we actually, as parliamentarians, create strategies to implement the kinds of things that the OSCE EPA stands for. We have seen that lots of nation states, or some nation states, have taken this advantage to deny democracy, to deny human rights, to move forward in very negative ways to harm their own populations and others. What are we going to do about that? We have an opportunity to talk about some strategic thinking in how we do this. We talked about conflict. How do we realize that conflict just wastes our resources and our time and our energy? And let's talk about how we start facing the common enemy, and that is COVID-19. And this pandemic, and I'm speaking as a physician here, isn't going to go away. It is only the first of many. And I think what we need to talk about is how do we prevent this from happening in future? How do we make epidemics that occur in one nation state be contained in that nation state? And to do that, we have to look at the countries that are poor and vulnerable and don't have any infrastructure for healthcare, any potable drinking water, any electricity, any roads, any ability to have human resources and frontline workers to take care of it and to contain an epidemic, so it doesn't become a pandemic. So we need to help like-minded countries to come together and talk about how we build infrastructure in some of the developing countries and some of the poorer countries that can prevent this from happening again. Because, you know, the world will not be able to deal with pandemics if they continue to happen. We will just always be in emergency mode. So let's build on some of the things. Let's go back to thinking about how do we get a democracy to function? How to create rule of law? How do we make sure? And we've looked at pictures on Twitter and Instagram about environments where in countries where you could never see the sky before, there's blue sky and there's a sunshine. And we're thinking, my goodness, because we're not using fossil fuels the way we used to, look at what we can do with the environment. How do we take these opportunities that have been presented to us to move forward with a different, new, brave, new world where we can start dealing with some of the issues that we don't have to continue to deal with again and again and again: poverty, the environment, vulnerable populations, gender, racism. How do we start building a new world, guys? I really want us to talk about that. I want us to talk about how we build real recommendations and strategies so that we can move forward, so that we can think about how we can change the world, make it a different place, make it better, and promote all of the values that we have espoused here at the OSCE EPA. And it sounds kind of Pollyannish, I know. It sounds idealistic, but I think we can do it. I think there are enough like-minded countries here in the OSCE EPA that we can come together and build the alliances and deal with multilateralism to actually stop wasting our time and resources on the negative things that we continue to foster, like conflict and you know, human rights violations, and start talking about how we build a stronger world, a more resilient world, and a more resilient OSCE EPA, where we can move on and build rather than continue to watch everything being destroyed. Anyway, thanks very much. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fry, dear Eddie. Now I give the floor to Barbara Bartusz, head of delegation from Poland. Barbara, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the President and the Secretary General. All the best wishes from Warsaw. I would like to begin by congratulating the President, the Secretary General, and the Secretariat on their wonderful work during the pandemics. For all of us, members of Parliament, it is extremely important to continue to meet, to discuss, to keep up the dialogue. Let me refer to some of the topics that were brought up during recent webinars. I would also like to assure you that Poland remains dedicated to the equal treatment of all persons and to the principle of non-discrimination on any ground. So the prohibition of discrimination is embedded in our constitution, and it is a principle that are key to our legal system. The LGBT community enjoys full protection against hatred, discrimination, and violence. I would also like to remind you that one of the main principles embedded in our constitution is the principle of particular protection of a marriage understood as a relationship between a man and a woman. We protect family and parenthood in Article 18 of our constitution. And when we speak about certain resolutions that were adopted by local authorities, they are often misunderstood and given as examples of discrimination. These documents are meant to provide family policy at a local level. They never refer to persons representing the LGBT movement or community. I would also like to mention certain resolutions or declarations adopted by some local authorities against the LGBT ideology. I speak of ideology, and I do not want Poland to be perceived as a country where any actions are taken against homosexuals or LGBT community. Many local authorities are simply protesting against a certain ideology that promotes certain activities that are contrary to the right of parents to raise their children according to their beliefs. So none of these declarations are against basic or fundamental freedoms. Courts looked at these declarations adopted at local levels. Some court rulings are already available, and they underline that these declarations are not unlawful. I want to underline this because Poland is a country of freedom, and I find this very painful when we are accused of violating anyone's right. I would also like to thank the OSCE for the special mission that is currently underway in Poland. This is the observation mission, SEAM, and we are currently organizing our presidential election, and hopefully we will choose our president for the next 5 years. And regardless of this very difficult pandemic crisis, we see a lot of interest in the elections. The turnout is really very impressive. And I would also like to refer to one statement that pertains to the freedom of the media or freedom of speech. Poland is a country where we enjoy a full freedom of speech. Polish public television is a public television, not a government one. We also have a whole range of private media of different coverage, different profile, and these are never in any way restricted in their operations. So I would like to conclude by appealing to the Parliamentary Assembly for an active measures to free Mr. Dmitriev, a Russian historian who is held against the law in prison. I wrote about this to the relevant committee, but I believe that Parliamentary Assembly as such should look at this issue. There is no time to waste. We should all act in order to free this gentleman, this historian. So thank you very much for this meeting. Thank you very much for this opportunity for the Standing Committee to meet online. And I would like to wish all of you, all of the members of the Parliamentary Assembly and all of our countries to be able to free themselves of the pandemics, and hopefully the observatory missions and other activities will be continued.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bartusz, dear Barbara. We will follow up with your request in the answer part of this. Now, I give the floor now to Vice President Azai Guliev. Before doing so, I just wanted to make a premises, because Azai Guliev, as President Guliev, contacted me during the week asking what was the agenda and what were the issues that we would discuss, and as in pure transparency, as you know, I mentioned, these are the speech of the president, myself, the treasurer, but there is not a conflict on the agenda or anything on the agenda. So somehow, he was taken by surprise that many people in this part of the debate have presented issues like that rather than simply asking questions of the president, treasurer, and myself. So with that apology, of course, but it's when it's an open debate, every delegation decides to bring up the issues that they want. So please go ahead and deliver whatever you want to deliver. But if you have questions for the Secretary General, the President, and the Treasurer, you're also welcome, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear my friend Roberto, first of all, for your transparency and very open discussions. Of course, you were right that we are frequently in touch with President Zelenski and discussing the current agenda of the Assembly and what can be useful for us to put forward. But of course, that this is really important that today we managed to gather together as a members of the committee. This is why I'd like to greet all of you from Baku and wish you a good health and a collective victory over the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, it is also great to see such intensive schedule of online meetings held by the OSCE, and I thank very much President Soretile and Roberto, you as Secretary General, of course, all other teams working together with you for providing us with such a crucial platform for regular discussions. Dear colleagues, as Roberto rightly mentioned, that I wish to speak about many other issues occupying the political agenda of international organizations, particularly on the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic and our joint response to this terrible health crisis. But I am compelled to focus on the most challenging issue in our region related to conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, because it's really very boring issue and a very crying issue for the region. And I do deem necessary to give some updates on the current situation of the conflict settlement and negotiation process. Dear friends, unfortunately, the situation still remains tense and dangerous after all these years of failed international efforts and Azerbaijan's unsuccessful attempt to hold the result-oriented negotiations with Armenia, which openly rejects by all means. The present state of affairs makes it inevitable to notice that there is a real risk for the military escalation due to the unconstructive and provocative behavior of Armenia. This is the reason why I decided to inform the Assembly on the issue. To completely understand the ongoing tendencies concerning the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict, I invite you to take a look at the chronology of relevant events which took place over the last 4 months. In March-April 2020, Armenia stages the true act play in the occupied Nagorno-Karabakh region of the Republic of Azerbaijan by holding the 2 rounds of the illegal so-called elections, which were heavily rejected and denounced by the international community, including OSCE. But the question is, did Armenia take any lessons from this condemnation? Not at all. Because already in April 2020, the Armenian political leadership openly criticized the statement made by Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Sergei Lavrov, on the step-by-step resolution of the conflict. Instead of accepting the truth, Armenia continues its endless attempts to preserve the status quo and hamper the peace talks. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's visit to the occupied city of Shusha of Azerbaijan in May to participate at the so-called inauguration ceremony held for the illegal and puppet regime's leadership is yet another provocation destroying the very essence of the peaceful settlement. I am sure that you are well informed about the recent joint statement adopted here in the European Parliament on June 10 concerning the illegal construction of a highway between Armenia and the occupied Nagorno-Karabakh region of Azerbaijan, where the European Parliament condemned Armenia's such unlawful acts in occupied Azerbaijan territories and reiterated its full support to the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and internationally recognized inviolability of internationally recognized borders of Azerbaijan. Besides that, already since the last year, the French court started to officially confirm the invalidity of so-called memorandums signed between the representatives of the popular region of the occupied lands of Azerbaijan and several French municipalities. Up to this date, almost all such agreements have been abolished as illegal acts by the relevant courts of France. Dear friends, Azerbaijan continues to propose the all-for-all exchange of hostages and war prisoners as part of the confidence-building measures, but without any adequate feedback from Armenia. Now the legitimate question arises: what else should be done if Armenia continues to refuse to end the conflict by just and peaceful means? What is the alternative to the peaceful and negotiated solution? In my view, the OEC Minsk Group co-chairmanship must find an answer to these questions and utilize all tools at its disposal to bring Armenia at the negotiation table as soon as possible. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vice President Guliyev, dear Azai. And now, again, in full transparency, we had as next speakers Elsie Hastings, but I'm not sure he's ready to go now. If
Yes.
he's ready to, okay, you go now then. Okay, then Elsie Hastings, former president of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. Elsie, you have the floor.
Thank you so very much for the continuing statements of concern regarding protests taking place in cities across the United States and the associated heavy-handed police response. That has been put to me by several members, not of the standing committee, but the president raised that as a question, and I think it's more than a legitimate one. Other parliamentarians have also raised this issue and underlying systemic racism that motivated people to the streets in various webinars and other gatherings. The Helsinki Final Act, comprehensive definition of security, includes respect for human rights as stated in Principle 7, and I quote, without distinction to race, sex, language, or religion. Just as the United States expects a serious and honest reply when it raises human rights concerns in your countries, the United States must provide you with a serious reply when you raise a concern with us. As head of the U.S. delegation, I thank you and others for raising the journey for racial justice that has motivated my entire public service career. It is so interesting that many of the things that were raised when I was a young lawyer are being raised again. Advancing inclusive and equitable societies has been a hallmark of my initiatives at the Helsinki Commission since my first chairmanship in 2007. I've facilitated transatlantic exchanges of experts and legislators from underrepresented and marginalized groups aimed at policy solutions for the grievances we once again are here demanded in the streets. And I might add here as well as in Europe and around the globe. Indeed, perhaps no event could so warrant, so require, and so compel our introspection as the 8 minutes and 46 seconds recording of the death of George Floyd. This tragedy, captured on cell phone video by a 17-year-old young lady, exposed long festering systemic challenges in the United States that are all too familiar to some, and now it seems newly understood by many. Just last week, the Commission convened a hearing on human rights at home, specifically focused on the implications of this racial justice reckoning we are witnessing and its implications of U.S. engagement with the world. This was among many efforts in the 116th Congress to address the notion that we must practice what we preach for the United States to have credibility to advance human rights abroad. As I'm sure you've heard, our Congress is rightly seized with seeking justice. Through committees with relevant jurisdiction, I'm working with others to advance legislation that, among other things, will ban chokeholds like occurred in the George Floyd situation by police, and no-knock warrants, and so long overdue, making lynching a federal crime. It's hard to believe that after so many years and so many deaths by lynching, that it is still not a federal crime in the United States. I note that on the webinar is my dear friend, Senator Cardin, who I'm sure in the U.S. Senate has been working on this issue along with all of us, and importantly, mindful that we have passed out of the House of Representatives a very substantial measure, and we feel very strongly that the Senate should undertake strong measures as well. And I know my colleagues, particularly Senator Cardin, have been pushing for this. I call on my colleagues in the OSCE PA and beyond to demand the same honest review of racial equity and policing outcomes in their respective nations. Our goal should be to solidify transatlantic agreements to this end, and the OSCE PA should lead, and I believe that it will. On not a humorous note, but just a different note, I think when I ran for president of the Parliamentary Assembly, I was arguing that we should have teleconferences, not teleconferences, but phone conferences. Little did any of us know that we would wind up with this marvelous technology that I hope helps us in the organization pursue what the organization needs to do. And I'm delighted to be on the call webinar with all of you. Without getting into names, it's just a pleasure to be with you. A moment of personal privilege, update on my health. So many of you have expressed concern about the fact that I'm battling pancreatic cancer. I'm doing well. The last scans that I had 2 weeks ago, the doctor said that my tumor was quiet. And so I decided that that meant that I could be noisy. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you very much, President Hastings, also for your very personal speech now. We are, of course, all very touched, and we all support you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca.
And thank you very much.
Dear Elsie, yeah, really very happy to see you, and We know that you will continue those activities for many years, and we're always happy to see and be with you. And thank you for your all encouragements and experiences you're sharing always with us.
Thank you, President Hastings. And I hope, of course, that this technology that we are now using will only be a substitute for when we cannot have meetings in person. I still hope that the future will be of meetings in persons, but look forward to seeing you again. And now I give the floor to the head of the delegation of Armenia, Aik Konyoryan. Thank you, have the floor. And thank you very much for the very good phone call that we had last week. We've discussed about many creative ideas also for what I was talking before in terms of creating confidence, and I look forward to follow up on that with you and Zaigulier in the future. I have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Roberto, Mr. Montella. Thank you, dear President, for your comprehensive reports. And dear colleagues, we appreciate the convening of this meeting during a very challenging time. The COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately impacted healthcare system of many countries and hampered socio-economic progress. The government of Armenia is taking relevant national level aimed at preventing the spread of COVID-19 pandemic and addressing its socio-economic consequences through adoption of a number of support programs. The crisis caused by the novel coronavirus showed that concerted efforts, solidarity of international community are instrumental in preventing and addressing the outbreak. To this end, we are grateful to many countries and multilateral organizations and specialized agencies for organizing medical missions to support Armenia in the fight against COVID-19. Dear colleagues, of course, I prepared. So now, I'm sorry, but I have to respond to bellicose, to baseless accusations of Zaigulier. Dear colleagues, I would like to share my assessments and concerns with regard to the security situation in our region. I regret to note that security situation is characterized by continuous deterioration against the backdrop of pandemic. Armenia and the Republic of Artsakh remain fully committed to the letter and spirit of the 1994 trilateral ceasefire agreement, which doesn't have time limitations. We resolutely denounce the use of force and work on creating an environment conducive to peace. However, continuous and repetitive state-level bellicose rhetoric, territorial claims, historical revisionism from one party, from Azerbaijan, to the conflict make the possibility of reaching settlement of the conflict even more remote. Dear colleagues, Armenia was among the first countries that supported the appeal of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres for immediate global ceasefire. Armenia also welcomed the statement made by OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs calling for utmost restraint and refraining from any action that could aggravate the situation in the conflict area, bearing in mind that limitations for exercising monitoring activities due to the situation with COVID-19. Unfortunately, neither the call by the UN Secretary General nor the statement by co-chairs were sufficient grounds for the certain state in our region, or Azerbaijan, to behave in a responsible manner, and we continue to witness the blatant violations of established ceasefire, including attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure. In March, for instance, after the shootings from Azerbaijani side, 14-year boy was wounded and two soldiers were injured. And large-scale military exercise conducted in violation of international commitments further exacerbate the fragile situation on the ground. This brings us to the necessity that the monitoring activity should be reinforced and not be disrupted under any circumstances, particularly during such crises as COVID-19 pandemics. So now coming to the elections in Artsakh. The election held in Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, once again demonstrated that human rights, particularly the right to vote and to take part in government, are inalienable and universal. The fundamental human rights instruments, in particular the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenants on Human Rights, clearly establish that in exercising human rights, no distinction shall be made on the basis of political, jurisdictional, or international status of any territory, and that all peoples can freely determine their political status by virtue of their right to self-determination and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. The attempt of Azerbaijan delegation to attack the democratic processes in Artsakh is regrettable. What has happened in Artsakh is the formation of new authorities through competitive and democratic elections. This is something beyond the reach of the authorities of Azerbaijan. In fact, the power in Azerbaijan has never been transformed through democratic elections, and that country has been ruled by a hereditary and repressive regime for decades. Azerbaijan's poor record of democracy and human rights have been well captured by various indexes of international human rights and institutions and actors. And now, coming to conflict building and peace process. My colleague Azay Guliev was talking about the peace process about peaceful settlement of conflict. What I want to say, Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, after the formation of government in Armenia, declared that any settlement of the conflict should be acceptable for the people of Armenia, for the people of Artsakh, and for the people of Azerbaijan. So this is something which is unprecedented, and this is very first step and big step from our side, from side of Armenia, to create that deep dialogue and to create that deep confidence building level. So now I want to, and until now, there wasn't any statement like this from Azerbaijani side. No statement that conflict resolution should be also acceptable for people of Armenia and for people of Artsakh. Moreover, Mr. Guliev several times rejected even the very existence of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, and this shows the real intentions of Mr. Guliev and Azerbaijan when they are speaking about peace process. And concluding, I just want to ask if Azerbaijani side really, frankly, wants to build a conducive atmosphere for conflict resolution, and if really they want peaceful settlement. Now I would like to ask: are you ready to make the same statement? Do you have enough courage to state that conflict settlement should be also acceptable for the people of Armenia and for people of Artsakh? If you have that little courage, it means that we would have chance to create really deep, conducive, peaceful atmosphere for conflict resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Of course, I am sure Mr. Guliev would want to answer that, but let's move on now first to the next speaker, who is Toril Ensem from Norway. Toril, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and also Mr. Secretary General and dear colleagues. First of all, I must say that I'm really sorry that we couldn't meet in Vancouver, but I would also use this opportunity to express gratitude for the good work within the OSCE these past months in exploring and also using new platforms, enabling us to keep our good work up and also this important dialogue. And as both our President and also Secretary General both remarked, the COVID-19 shows us that collaboration is really needed more than ever. And this is also so when it comes to concerns connected to climate changes. The OSCE has an important role, And therefore, I would like to use this opportunity and also remind you all about our Parliamentary Web Dialogue on Arctic issues on September 16th. The title will be From the Arctic to Global, the political role in addressing climate changes. Its main focus will be to debate how climate change is affecting the Arctic, but also the rest of the world, and influenced by what is happening in the Arctic. So I think it's really important to raise awareness and to show the role of parliaments and interparliamentary organizations. So this will be our contribution on online substitute for the side event that was supposed to take place in Vancouver. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toril. And now I give the floor to the new head of the UK delegation, Right Honourable Johnson. You have the floor, sir. Welcome to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly.
Thank you very much indeed, Roberto. I wasn't actually intending to speak here, but I thought I'd use this opportunity just to introduce myself as the new head of the delegation from the UK. Firstly, can I apologise for the curtains behind me? I'm sure they've affected your eyes throughout this meeting. What the House of Commons boasts in tradition and history, it lacks in taste of its curtains, I'm afraid. Can I also thank the President for his warm words of welcome at the beginning of this meeting as well, very much appreciated. As you're probably aware, I'm a member of Parliament in the House of Commons. I'm some experience in international relations, but I'm very new to the OSCE, so I have a lot to learn about the structures and workings of OSCE, and so I'm very much looking forward to doing that. I'm the Parliamentary Private Secretary to Jean-Luc Raab, our Foreign Secretary, and some experience there, and also through the IPU. So I'm very much looking forward to getting stuck into the OSCE in the future. As we're the UK is going through a transitional period with its relationship with the European Union at the moment. And you'll be relieved to know that I don't want to get into the politics of Brexit right now. But it's fair to say that the UK is very determined to be outward-looking in its approach to political matters from here on, and not inward-looking. We're very much going to be an internationalist country. We're an integral part, not just of NATO, the G7, the United Nations Security Council, and the Commonwealth, but of course, obviously, the OSCE as well. So, yeah, it's very much our intention to work very, very closely with the whole international government to see that the OSCE has continued in the way that it has during this very, very difficult time for the planet. So I also add my congratulations to the OSCE for making sure that operations continue throughout this period. We have the annual assembly, of course, penciled in for the UK for 2022, something that myself and the British Secretariat haven't had an opportunity of properly discussing yet. That's something we very much intend to do in the near future. So finally, I just wanted to make those brief remarks to introduce myself and to thank you all for the welcome that you've given to me. And in a virtual way, shake the hand of every one of you right now. Unfortunately, I can't do it in person, but I very much forward to working with each and every one of you very, very soon as it's safe to do. So thank you.
Thank you very much and welcome again. And now I give the floor to Doris Barnett from Germany. Doris.
Thank you very much, dear Secretary General. And I'm so happy to see you all well. And I wish I could say that also about the people we represent, but we cannot. I would like to react to some things you talked about. Our Secretary General said that parliamentarians make the difference between governments. But how can parliamentarians make things happen? And this is also what Hedy Fry said. How can we achieve something? I think we did a lot of work with our webinars. And also we have all good best practice at home. Why don't we see to it that we discuss the things we achieved in our webinars in our parliaments and tell our parliaments from the achievements other countries of the OSCE had, and therefore spread the news that you can do it differently and probably help each other, but not by buying off all the medication for one country, but rather, spread it. So every country, all the people have something from it. And of course, also, we cannot have regular meetings right now. But in future, should that pandemic be over, shouldn't we see to it that we can have other meetings? When we meet at the winter meeting, the annual session, and the autumn meeting, we have so many regulations and we stuck in them. And what we need is this kind of speech and this kind of exchange of views, what we have now. Therefore, at least this is what I could do at home. I saw to it that for the within our budget from next year on, we put quite a big chunk of money aside for seminars and meetings in Germany for the OSCE. So we can meet and have exchange views, and because otherwise if we only stay in regulated meetings, we read to each other the statements, but there's hardly any real exchange of views. And if we really want to have a trust and confidence amongst each other, we need more private places, not open ones where the governments are sitting in our neck, or the people from the embassies wherever we meet. You know what I mean. And when you were talking about Syria and all the problems we see in the world, we probably talking of the I just can't say it, the excellent idea of the Silk Road Initiative ad hoc committee, which we might have, that we of course have also to talk about Hong Kong and what's happening there, because the values the Chinese share must not be, and probably are not, the same kind of values we share amongst each other. Therefore, we need to discuss that also, because should we, invite the Chinese in? What kind of values we are discussing then? But well, this is another story. But this is just something we should remind when we talk about having the Chinese investing everywhere, bringing their kind of values, working traditions and things to us. And therefore, this was just a couple of remarks to what you said, and you guys said. And I'm very happy that we have this possibility of exchange of views. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barnett, dear Doris. And now I give the floor to Chris Smith, Congressman Chris Smith from the United States.
Thank you very much.
Chris, you need to turn on your microphone. Yes, good. Good now.
Okay.
Good now. Good.
Thank you very much, Roberto. And Mr. President, thank you for convening us today. I wish we were all together. It would have been great. But obviously with COVID-19, every one of us are dealing with our constituents back home. My state of New Jersey has been hit in a very, very profound way. Half of all of our deaths are in nursing homes. So we've had such a terrible impact from this coronavirus. So I know you're all dealing with it as well, and I wish you well. The sooner we get to a point where we got a vaccine and some drugs that really do work, like remdesivir, the better. So I wish you all well in this fight. As the special rep on human trafficking, and Mr. President, because we did a seminar on this, and I also spoke to the OSCE, and I've been talking to a lot of parliamentarians. Under the COVID-19, it has actually gotten worse for some, particularly for children. The online grooming has exploded as students are not in school, and the groomers are out there, the pedophiles, the predators, looking for children. and they're finding them. And some of the groups here, like ECPAC, have said there's been 200 to 300% increase in this child exploitation, which leads to obviously child trafficking. So all of us need to be even more aware of it. We work with our Justice Department as well as with local governments to try to do more. ECPAC actually put out, and thank you, Mr. President, for receiving the information about the new pamphlet they put out, which is excellent, a guide to parents, not just to the children, as to what to look for when kids are online and how they might be exploited each and every day. For the survivors of trafficking, many of whom have gotten gainful employment over the years, because of the job losses, they now are vulnerable in a different way again, because they have no means, no livelihood, and income. The traffickers looking to re-exploit and re-traffic them. So that is a very, very real problem that's manifesting in all of your countries and certainly in the United States. In terms of the prosecutions, my sense is that there's been and I do talk to the Justice Department, to local officials in my own state and in other states and in your countries as well. The prosecutions have ebbed. They have slowed to a trickle because the police can't do their work the way they would like. So there's an inability, frankly, to do the surveillance, to try to get those who prey upon women and children. So we all need to be looking as to how we can enhance the law enforcement side, the survivor side, to make sure that there is gainful employment, and even shelters. Because of social distancing, shelters increasingly are having fewer people. There cannot be large numbers. We all know 6 feet and all of those modes of protection. So there's a concern about that. Then there's also the issue of funding from philanthropic groups and from governments, because this hit we've all taken, and the NGOs and the philanthropic groups have taken. They don't have as much money to deploy in combating trafficking. Last year, you all might recall, I offered a resolution. I'll conclude on this. And I do have a full report I do hope you'll take a look at, on the whole idea of protecting children and training the teachers and the children to be situationally aware. It passed as a supplementary item, and thank you all. Mr. President, thank you, and Roberto, thank you for supporting it so strongly. I wrote a law called the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Prevention and Protection Act, named after the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who we were celebrating his 200th birthday. He was a slave and became one of the greatest leaders for freedom this country has never known, and really the world has ever known. So we named it after him, and you might recall we had his great-great-grandson at a side event last year at the Parliamentary Assembly. But what we're trying to do is roll out even more this training of the teachers so that they can impart that information to their students, especially as some of the schools will be opening. Not a lot. Some will be doing the equivalent of homeschooling with teacher guidance from the schools, but they'll be staying at home. But many also will be going to their schools. So we need to ratchet that up as well. So I would ask you, if you get a chance, to look at our action plan last year and the supplementary item, because it's filled with good, solid, doable actionable items that you could undertake. We're doing it here. The Department of Health and Human Services, which was given, and Department of Education, the mandate pursuant to my law, are implementing it very aggressively. And I think because of that, more kids will be saved. So thank you again, and looking forward to seeing all of you very, very soon.
Thank you very much, Congressman Smith. And
thank you, Roberto.
Now I give the floor to Michael Link from Germany. Michael, you have the floor.
Hello, dear friends. Roberto, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Michael. Go ahead.
Thank you.
And we see you.
And great to see so many friends and colleagues. And to hear Chris Smith, active as always. Congratulations to the new act you're preparing. I wanted to raise with you, dear colleagues, a matter of concern. Of course, first of all, I fully agree with Doris Barnett, what she said, especially on China. But I wanted to raise with you another matter of concern, because recently we saw, and you all know, electoral observation is one of our, well, cornerstones. Lately, we saw a lot of, let's say, internationally not legitimized so-called observers doing observation either in unrecognized territories such as Crimea or in Karabakh or Ossetia, etc., or doing electoral observation as we had it right now in the Russian Federation on the Constitution, doing something which they call is observation. Well, we all know, of course, that electoral observation should be legitimized by OSCE. And it's not a private endeavor. It's not something that you can do just on your own. And you cannot simply let yourself be invited and call yourself an international electoral observer. You need the stamp, the trademark, let's say, and the quality emblem of OSCE, or let's say, Organization of American States in Venezuela, etc., in America, or Council of Europe. I think we should, dear colleagues, we should defend that quality and that trademark. And therefore, because we have more and more, lately in the constitutional referendum in the Russian Federation, where we had French parliamentarians, German parliamentarians, Italian parliamentarians, partially also members of this assembly, who are going there to a private mission invited by whoever, I don't talk about that, but those who go to such a mission and who are member of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, I think they should be banned of observing again officially for the OSCE PA. Because they are tarnishing, they are damaging the name of the OSCE PA by participating in such internationally non-recognized endeavors. And I think that is very bad for all of us. Our assembly is really dependent on the respect of the rules we gave to ourselves. So whenever a member of us goes to an unrecognized territory where we have no consensus, or goes to a private invitation and calls himself or herself an electoral observer, this should have consequences. And I would like to propose that we discuss that here and discuss it with the necessary time, that this should have consequences. Thank you very much, dear colleagues.
Thank you very much, Michael. Indeed, this is an issue that needs to be discussed, and we have seen reports of these so-called fake observers. I don't think we will have time today to have, because we need to have a proper debate on this. And last year, we issued some new guidelines for election observation. But I agree with you, these measures have to be as stringent as possible in order to increase, and I think we have a good level of credibility of our election observation, and make sure that all the participating states see that those who are deployed in their respective countries to observe the elections are adhering to very strict methodology, which is the one we have normally applied. But let's discuss this in a separate moment. And before I move on to the next item on the agenda, Mr. Guliev and Mr. Konyaran have requested again the floor. So we have another hour for 2 other points on the agenda. It's basically up to you to make it a 4 hours debate or a 2 minutes debate. But please, I call on your sense of responsibility to be extremely short, Azai and Ike. Thank you. Azai, you have the floor.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you very much for giving the floor to exercise my right to give some explanation and clarification to my Armenian colleague. I read your message saying that we have to keep a bit room for the further activities and to be ready for some quantitative measures. Of course, I understand your point, and in respect you, I will be now politically correct. But of course, the issue that being raised, I would say not issue, but accusations, groundless accusations have been put by my Armenian colleague, of course, needs to be answered. But before doing that, I'd like to thank Michael Link for his very, very essential remarks, and also for his commitments to be in line with the OSCE values and the principles when it comes to the elections in unrecognized puppet regimes or unrecognized territories, or the occupied territories such as Nagorno-Karabakh, Abkhazia, and others. Of course, it is pretty much appreciated that we have such a consensus, and also I want to recall the last press release made by the OEC Parliamentary Assembly's bureau members about that. We made it clear that how we should, let's say, behave in that regard. But coming to the remarks made by my Armenian colleague, Mr. Kanjarian, Roberto, I understand, to be honest, the situation of my Armenian colleague, because as you know that in each case, when I raise the issue, which is legitimate issue, legitimate concern, legitimate question about the occupation, about the, let's say, violation of human rights, about the ethnic cleansing, the act of genocide, or so on, Armenian colleague, to be honest, doesn't have anything to react. I understand the desperate situation in answering, in finding a reasonable answer to the question. But anyway, I think really this platform should be served to finding some sort of understanding and be in line with the international commitments and the other, let's say, obligations that our countries have been taking. So the first question, elections in the occupied region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Dear friends, what type of elections are you talking about? It was not the election, it was the stage. It was the show staged by Armenia, which was rightly rejected and denounced by international community. So my question is why Armenia doesn't accept this reality? This is the first. This is first, and I do recommend my Armenian colleague at least to be in silence when it comes to such a very clear and very obvious question, issues that is completely against the Armenian political discourse and the policy that is proceeding now. The second, dear Roberto, my Armenian colleague is always speaking about the human rights, democracy in Azerbaijan. Please, you first look at the political situation in Armenia, then blame the others on the same. What happens in Armenia now? The increasing number of the political prisoners. I have the list of 58 political prisoners. The case of the journalist who announced the hunger strike in the Armenian prison, who died after 48, let's say, 48 or 47, I don't know, days of the having the hunger strike in the prison. Nobody paid attention to that. Just look at the recent developments in Armenia. The second fraction in Armenian parliament, Tarukyan, has been deprived from the right of immunity just because he was against party of Pashinyan regime. He was kicked out because of this is the democracy. Now Armenian government, to be honest, controls all the branches of the power. So this is the question really needs to be answered. But when it comes to, Robert, I'm finishing. When it comes to the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, you know, everyone knows that there is no such a people. There is Armenian and Azerbaijanis living in Nagorno-Karabakh. What we offer is, of course, Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh is the citizens of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan pledged the obligation and commitment to protect the rights of the Nagorno-Karabakh and to provide the security. So we have the phased negotiations. This is why if we have really an intention to tackle the issue in a constructive way, we have to be in line with all this commitment. So this is why my recommendation to my colleague from Armenia that you should define whether you call the Nagorno-Karabakh, then you call Artsakh. What is Artsakh? What is the others? You are trying to, you have to be very strict to the name, first of all. This is why people of Nagorno-Karabakh as such is not existing, because there is a population of Azerbaijan and Armenian and Azerbaijani communities living in Nagorno-Karabakh. So we are ready to grant all the rights to them to live, to coexist. The last, my final point, I want to recommend my Armenian colleagues that with Armenian people, Armenian government, to be abandoned from the illusion of the legitimizing the results of occupation. It will never happen. This is why when we are talking about that, my Armenian colleague deliberately divert the attention from the main topic, from the main issue, and trying to put another topic and to trigger the unnecessary discussion. I'm very sorry for my colleagues. I took their time, but I am obliged to do this statement. But of course, I agree with Roberto. I'm always ready. I'm always open to have a constructive discussion with Armenian colleagues to find a way how the parliamentarians can engage in finding the soonest solution for the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, dear Vice President Gulia, dear Azai. I now give the floor to the head of the Armenian delegation. I don't see him on the screen. But,
thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, dear Roberto, for this opportunity. So now I would like to make some comments to my Azerbaijani colleague. When Mr. Guliev speaks about the human rights of people of Nagorno-Karabakh, and he says that he doesn't understand what does it mean, human rights of people of Artsakh. I guess it is not because of us or because of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, but it's because of the understanding or of the lack of understanding of human rights concept at all. Because when we are looking to the Azerbaijan and to all developments of Azerbaijan, we understand that the absence of human rights in Azerbaijan is reflecting also in speeches of Mr. Guliev. So now Mr. Guliev speaks about the democracy and about the processes in Armenia. I would like to say that Armenia is a democratic country, and if someone, no matter is he politician, is he businessman, or is he official, if someone committed any crime, he should be responsible for his crimes. This is something, Mr. Guliev, which is ununderstandable for you. Of course, I understand, because in Azerbaijan, for instance, it can be very fantastic if someone from the power taking, for instance, responsibility for its crimes. So now let's have a closer look to democracy, so-called democracy of Azerbaijan. Ilham Aliyev, current president of Azerbaijan, he's the president starting from 2003. So already 17 years. He inherited that presidency from his father, Heydar Aliyev. So this is not democracy, Mr. Guliev. This is military regime, this is nepotism, this is family dictatorship, but not democracy. So that is why when you are speaking about Armenian democracy and you don't understand the processes, democratic processes here in Armenia, it is not because of us, it is because of you, Mr. Guliev. We many times already mentioned, and we're speaking about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and we say that Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, it is not conflict about the territory, it is conflict about the human rights, it is conflict about the people. For Azerbaijan, this is purely the conflict of the territory. That's why even here in your during your second intervention, Mr. Guliev, you again refused the existence of people of Nagorno-Karabakh. So that this is for you just a matter of territory. For us, this is a matter of human rights of people. And people of Nagorno-Karabakh have full right of self-determination, have full right to determine their future, to determine their destiny. And when you are speaking about coexistence, when you are speaking about the peaceful, about the peace, about guarantees from the Azerbaijan for Armenia. So now I want to just quote one very short sentence. This is the one of the statements of a current president of Ilham Aliyev, and I just quote it. When Ilham Aliyev said, "Armenians of the world are the main enemy of Azerbaijan." So how can you imagine peaceful coexistence or any guarantee from the side of Azerbaijan to the people of Nagorno-Karabakh when the president of Azerbaijan considers Armenians as the main enemy of Azerbaijan. So it's very important. Your logic is very important, and sometimes it's fantastic. And now I want to, by concluding, I just want to talk about another anti-Armenian and Armenophobic issue. The anti-Armenian actions of Azerbaijani leadership have already received their legal assessment from the international community. On May 26, 2020, the European Court of Human Rights has passed a judgment on the case Mukuchian and Minasyan versus Azerbaijan and Hungary related to the assassination of Armenian officer by the Azerbaijani counterpart in Budapest. The court condemned the racist policy of Azerbaijan through the actions of pardoning, releasing, and rewarding the murderer Ramil Safarov. Court found that there had been no justification for the Azerbaijani authorities' failure to enforce the punishment of Ramil Safarov and to in effect grant him impunity for a serious hate crime, and that Azerbaijan had clearly endorsed Ramil Safarov's act not only by releasing him but also promoting him, paying him salary areas, and granting him a flat upon his return. The court's decision is a ruling against Azerbaijan's policy of Armenophobia. So by concluding, once again, I want to remind Mr. Guliev and all our colleagues about these tragic events, about the deep Armenophobia, about the hatred towards Armenians in Azerbaijan. And again, I want to mention that conflict resolution cannot take part if one of the parties of the conflict, Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, doesn't take part to the resolution of the conflict, because one of the basic documents signed in 1994 ceasefire agreement was signed by three parties: Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh, and Azerbaijan. So now we are sure that any resolution of conflict also would be if three parties equally participate to the conflict resolution. Thank you very much.
Roberto.
Thank you very much. No, Azai, please, I would like to.
I'm very sorry, but it's impossible to continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just a second. I'm presiding over this meeting. I see now. I understand. It will never end. I'm very sorry. So we have to stop at this point. At this point.
Vicky, just very
No. That would be a response from Armenia. But just to finish, maybe I don't know, Roberto.
No, I agree. I mean, we should conclude this point. You've had four chances of speaking, 2 and 2. I think we should conclude it.
I agree, dear Roberto, because we have two equal chances. So I think that we can conclude, because if Mr. Guliev answers, I have to answer again. So that's why I think
it's okay now.
But I was pretty.
Dear friends,
I fall into the personality. But unfortunately, my colleague didn't. I understand. I recommend my colleague. I understand that he came from the street.
Mr. President, could we have some respect for the chair? You have already ruled.
No, I'm trying to intervene in this and ask my colleagues here.
I know.
Stop this to stop this. Let's say skirmish.
I know, and I am asking our colleagues to respect your rulings, which I support totally.
Thank you very much. So, dear friends, anyway, we have to continue with other reports here. I'd like to thank you, Roberto, for this moderation. I understand that it's not easy. So there were so many issues raised during this discussion. Just making notes, and I'm very much thankful to all my colleagues here for their interventions. Of course, we heard very kind words about our work, mine as a president, Secretary General, our team. I don't want to distinguish anybody here from the leadership, President or Secretary General. We did, during this 3 or 4 months, everything together. Somebody told here, I think it was Heidi Fry, that we are meeting each other much more frequently now than it was before. And that's true. So we found time, we are making contributions, we dedicated part of our work to this purpose, and we know that that's important, what we are doing. So we couldn't stop this organization from functioning. We have to strengthen this organization. Maybe sometimes we're repeating many things, but it means that problems are here, so that they didn't vanish at all. And also this, let's say, verbal dispute, which of course we are always anticipating when it's Armenia and Azerbaijan, when Russia and Georgia, when Ukraine also there, because we know that unfortunately, and I repeated it a few times, and been convinced during our webinars here in conflicts that we didn't move even step forward during this pandemic. It no any progress, even worse, that what we're hearing now, it's not a goodwill for reconciliation. There's always something which brings, more hostility. That's, of course, very much disappointing. I had several times with Secretary General talks with Azerbaijani delegations, with Armenians. We're trying to make steps for confidence building, and that should be spirit for this. That should be, let's say, people should determine something in themselves to find this little bit added trust or added value, and to make more efforts for reconciliation rather than to have this belligerent or bellicose rhetoric. So of course it's disappointing what's happening, but also it's compelling us and forcing us to work more, because we are in the middle of maybe at the latest stage of pandemic, but we're hearing from experts that it's the second wave is coming in, and there will be other challenges in post-COVID era. But we all see that even in our discussions and during our discussions here. Look, I'm very proud of our special reps and special rapporteurs. They are putting their heart in their work, like Chris Smith or Heidi Fry or Senator Cardin or Toriel or Margareta Zederfeld. I mean, all of them. And we see, the will of our politicians, our friends, our leaders to really show the change. And that's our aim. That's what we have to do together. Nobody can do it alone. And that's a gist of our discussions here. We, of course, enriching each other with more information, with more knowledge, where we have bottlenecks, where are major problems, beyond, let's say, our traditional security, political, economy, human rights. Human rights, we see, aggravation of all the world picture on human rights everywhere, in every world, when we see that many dictatorships, many regimes, they are trying to use this pandemic to strengthen, their grip, their influence, to silence, critics, to jail journalists, to oppress opposition more. So we have to respond to those issues always, and I'm very happy that we have leaders in our assembly who are doing that. Just to say a few words, there were few very rational also suggestions. I think Kari Erickson suggested that, and also that Doris and some others, that we have to, let's say, make maybe a shorter version or reports what webinars did. I mean, what was the value of those webinars? And Roberto, you partly already responded to that, that there will be in our documents some explanations. What was this webinar that everybody appreciated, and web dialogues and so on. And not to, let's say, go further now, because we will have also opportunity to change a little bit after Peter Bonus will report. Then Mike Link said, and I think we need separate discussion. We had exchange before 2 days ago about this fake observance, and I'm very much disappointed that any of OSCP observer, any our colleague or friend, I don't know, made this big mistake going somewhere and not recognize, let's say, elections or territories. And I think despite of our stricter rules in election observation, so we still have maybe problematic areas of loopholes that we have to close. And I think that should be very, very strict sanctions against those activities. Otherwise, we couldn't prevent it. And finally, I'm now looking at the screen. I see so many countries, many of our colleagues. I don't know any other organization who did, let's say, so many efforts and made so many efforts in transatlantic cooperation during this COVID. At every webinar, at every seminar, we have all our members, almost everybody, all the American delegation, Canadian delegation, others, and it's very, very important. I'm always underlining that because it's great sign of cooperation, and I think world also should know that there's not that big divisions which some countries like to, let's say, portray that United States and Europe, they will be very closely cooperate and work together. And assembly and parliamentary assembly is a very good example. And thank you for this. So I will leave some ideas when we'll have another part of discussion after Peter Bonus.
Thank you.
Lord Bonus will present his report. So now.
Thank you, Mr. President. I now give the floor to Elona to conclude this agenda item because Elona was already on the speakers list for this general debate, and then we will move on to Lord Boness's item.
Elona, I'm very sorry I didn't see you in the speakers list. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Elona.
No problem. I'll try to be very short. Thank you very much. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, George, and to all the OSCE team, and also warm greetings to all my colleagues that are present today. What a pity that we are not in Vancouver, and we could have been together and also have joined forces for a lot of good things. Anyway, as it was already mentioned, a great work has been done during these months, and I think that all compliments go to the OCPA for the leadership and from all these kind of productive themes and all the platforms that we have been participating and we have been also benefited. Just only very, very short saying what has been done. We have done in Albania. I mean, we've been very active as a parliament. There are already 63 laws that have been passed, 19 resolutions and 18 reporting, 4 interpellances, and a lot of contribution from the oppositions that is in the parliament. And we have worked through the online, let's say, platforms, and of course being present every Thursday, respecting the social distancing. What I would like also to mention and to say is that we really want to also benefit more and to contribute that how Parliament can really function during a crisis, which we don't know when it will end. That's why we really have to talk and to exchange views among others. And of course, we need also some more guidance as well, how other parliaments are working to ensure that the government interventions during the COVID-19 crisis take into account a lot of dimensions which are very important as well. And I think that maybe we can also share all of this good experience through using videos and let's say showing our good work, which you also said rightly that we are unique in terms of the parliaments and parliamentarians are working. And of course, I would like also to mention that Albanian presidency will continue to be very active. We hope to see all of you in December in Albania and in Tirana. Of course, earlier to see each other during the autumn as it was planned, and hopefully to have some good news with regards to the COVID-19. Maybe a suggestion could be also to exchange a bit more regarding the scientific data that are regarding the COVID-19. There is a lot of contradictory also information, which sometimes is not, let's say, helping. That's why maybe why not to use also this platform to have much more update information. We have George, which is a doctor, and yeah, definitely can also help us and support us. And also a suggestion from the special representative from the Trafficking in Human Beings. Already there have been published the TIP report, which has assessed all the countries regarding trafficking of human beings. It would be good also to share among us, so each parliamentarians can look at that very valuable survey, not survey, but panoramics, and contribute and putting more pressure to the governments in order to ensure that all the suggestions and reflection from this tip are already properly, let's say, introduced in respective countries. Thank you very much, and I wish you a happy summer and hope to see all of you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elona. I think this can be the wrap up of this point on the agenda. There were just few questions, but I think the president has already sort of given a general overview. So I suggest that we talk about these issues of fake observers sometime in the autumn with an ad hoc meeting on that, and move on now to point 5 on the agenda, which is the report by Vice President Lord Bonas on reforms in the Parliamentary Assembly. Lord Bonas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and Secretary General. I hope that you can hear me. Good. Thank you very much indeed. Well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody and colleagues. And it's a great pleasure to see you all, although it would have been an even greater pleasure, as many members have said, had we been doing that in Vancouver. Can I add my thanks to the President and the Secretary General for the webinars, which have been so valuable. And they may be a use for something like this at some time in the future, but not as a replacement for our normal face-to-face meetings. Some things may change as a result of COVID, but I don't believe that the face-to-face meetings is one of them. Can I just say, refresh the committee's memory about the subcommittee and the Working Practices Subcommittee. The Rules and Working Practices Subcommittee has two elements to its work. The rules element is to look at the rules as they exist and to propose changes or discuss requested changes to the rules. The working practices element looks at how we do our work and how we can ensure what we do has been done with the best use of our time and to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our meetings. Now, a further element to that was the establishment of the Bureau Working Group by the President, which is currently co-chaired by the President and myself. And that discusses with a small number of members various ideas and recommendations which should be explored further. Some of them stem from the paper A Need for Change, which was now published a long time ago. But over the years and discussions, we've refined some of the things that we think we ought to be able to take forward. And just for the reference of members of the Standing Committee, a report was made to the Standing Committee in February 2019, which gave out the whole history of everything, all the ideas which had been discovered, and brought everybody up to date. Now, at the virtual Bureau meeting in April of this year, some conclusions and recommendations were reached. And those are the things which I particularly want to address this afternoon. Firstly, that the Rules Committee should undertake a comprehensive review of all the rules. They've been in place for a long time with only relatively minor changes, and those changes have been made as a result of some problem arising. But there hasn't been a comprehensive look at that. Now, Ambassador Natele is going to be working with the Rules Subcommittee and producing a paper, and no doubt will want to tell you some of his concerns when I finish this report. But I hope that we'll be able to have a meeting of the Rules Committee, albeit virtually, in October. Now, there are going to be two priorities, in my view, to that review. First of all, many members, many delegations have said to me that we need a rule which will adequately deal with emergency situations such as we have just had, and avoiding the necessity of perpetuating ourselves in office for 12 months or more. We need to look at that. We also, the other matter which is outstanding is resolving the problem of what is a quorum for the plenary session. We thought in Marrakesh that we had come to a conclusion with our Russian colleagues, but unfortunately it proved not to be the case. And so further work needs to be done on that, because we do have a situation where the quorum is actually undefined, other than putting total discretion in the hands of the president, which is pretty unacceptable for the president, and I suspect is not very acceptable to large numbers of our own delegates. So that's the situation on rules. On working practices, Mr. President, there are three things which I'd like to bring up as briefly as I can. Firstly, there's been reference today about the further opportunity to discuss items which have arisen. And I think we, at the last Bureau meeting, thought that the possibility of the committees meeting in the autumn session is something which could be pursued. It does require a rule change. I wouldn't have thought it would be controversial, maybe controversial for other reasons in terms of times of members or expenses of Parliament sending members. But in principle, I would have thought it was uncontroversial and would enable the autumn meeting to be an opportunity for further discussion to take place. The second working practice which we want to look at is how we can have an executive summary of future declarations. The annual declaration is always a very large document. We have felt for some time that it doesn't make the impact that it should. Maybe that's because not enough people read it from cover to cover. So we need to have an executive summary. How you arrive at an executive summary is not that easy, because it's no good taking a whole lot of resolutions and reports which have been agreed and voted upon and then putting it in the hands of a few people to edit it. So I think we have to have a way whereby the rapporteurs of the general committees and the authors of the special resolutions, supplementary items, I'm sorry, indicate in advance that if their report goes through or their item is accepted, these are the matters that they would wish to highlight, and this could then come together in a settlement. But I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily the answer, but it is one way of avoiding a group of people having to make decisions on something which has actually been voted on. And the third matter, it relates to the Belt and Road initiative. Now, can I say to Vice President Osce, and I can see he's smiling because he knows that probably what I'm going to say. He established the Belt and Road initiative, and I congratulate him for doing it.
Silk and road, Peter. It's not a Belt and Road. Silk road.
I congratulate him for doing Belt and Road, Mr. President. Some people refer it to that. Some people refer it to Silken Road. It's been changed, actually, with great respect. But however, let's not go down that road. We all know what we're talking about. We're talking about the Major China Initiative, which in fact affect many members of participating states of our organization, as well as the maritime element of it, which is a little further away from our principal consideration. The point which I really want to dwell upon is this, that Osce and his group have for a long time now marketed themselves, if I can put it that way, as the Belt and Road, Silken Belt, whatever, group of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. And we all know that actually, whilst the members may be members of the Parliamentary Assembly, they actually have to join that organization. It has a separate secretariat, and although it may meet sometime in the margins of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly meetings, it is not part of the formal structure. It is not accountable to our Bureau or indeed to this committee. and is not under the control of the International Secretariat. Now, because China is becoming such a big issue, and because we cannot really have some organization bearing some organization calling itself part of the Parliamentary Assembly, which is not open to everybody, it needs to be brought within the structure. And the suggestion has been made that it becomes an ad hoc committee. And I think Vice President Osce is relatively content with that. If he and his members don't like that idea, well, then they can carry on. But I think it is the thought, with the feeling of the Bureau, that if they carry on doing, as it were, their own thing, they will have to do it without the appellation of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and run it as a freestanding, separate organization. I hope that won't be necessary. I hope that they can come back I hope that they can come back and say that they will agree, and I hope that the Standing Committee this afternoon is going to say that yes, they will agree to the establishment of an ad hoc committee to replace this group, take the place of this group. Its terms of reference need to be established. I believe that the terms of reference need to take account of the importance of China. I mean that China's investing in, I think, 60 states, major investments. There are all sorts of potential problems, such as debts that can't be met, influence flows as a consequence of that. I'm not going to go into the merits of that. I'm not going to go into the merits of China and its activities in Hong Kong or anything else at the moment. All I want to say is that I believe that it is such an important issue that we should follow this through and get the ad hoc group within the structure of the Parliamentary Assembly. And can I say in that, and that really is all that I really want to say, report about the rules changes, that will go forward, and ask that the Standing Committee looks with favour upon the idea of committees meeting in the autumn, executive summary in the future of future declarations, and this ad hoc committee dealing with Silk and Belt, Belt and Road, George, whichever you prefer, and China in general. And lastly, can I just say, I'm sorry if I interrupted Osce and our colleague from Armenia earlier this afternoon, but I do think we are all parliamentarians. We do need to respect the president when he asks us to say no more. And I understand how strongly both sides feel. It's clearly of vital importance to them, which is why I have suggested on other occasions, and perhaps this afternoon would lead us to think about it again, that on our agendas, so that we avoid the sort of situation that arises this afternoon, there is an allocated time and slot for dealing with these conflicts, rather than people who have real concerns having to interject these concerns into debates about other things. Thank you so much, Mr. President, Secretary General. If there are any questions that I can answer, I will certainly try. Otherwise, I'll be happy to hear the contributions of members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Lord Bones. Now I open the debate on this agenda item, not on the previous agenda item. So on the reforms that Lord Bones has described, and also on this issue of the Silk Road initiative. And as the speakers, we have Mr. Osce Guliev as the first speaker. Vice President Guliev, you have the floor.
Thank you, Roberto. Dear colleagues, I really apologize for a bit emotional reaction, and I do understand that it's a very sensitive issue, but I fully agree with Mr. Lord Bones saying that this sometimes triggers unnecessary, let's say, discussions, but I do recommend my colleagues not to break the ethics norm, because we are parliamentarians, we understand we are politicians, we have to be in line with the parliamentary language. This is what I wanted just to say. But anyway, coming back to the report of Mr. Lord Bonis, first of all, of course, I appreciate the very, very timely and very valid suggestions and proposals put forward by my distinguished colleague, Lord Bonis. As you know that one of the items that we could touch upon the issue of the secret support group. First of all, as President Secretary corrected, it is not one bed, one road. This is just a secret support group. We have in many occasions explained that it doesn't have directly anything with China, despite the fact that China is very much interesting stakeholder. But of course, this concerns particularly OECD. But anyway, we have that discussed it very, very widely, and I'd like to make some few remarks. As you know, this group has been established 3 years ago in July in Minsk, and over the past 3 years, group has successfully organized its activity and managed to hold regular meetings during sessions and also the international conferences in different capitals, as well as you know, that at the 29th annual session of the CPA held in Berlin in July 2019, the Assembly adopted a resolution on promoting connectivity in the OECD area through development of transport links and corridors, including by revitalizing the ancient Silk Road. In this resolution, Assembly welcomed the establishment of the Silk Road support group within the OECD and also acknowledged that the Silk Road initiative is necessary for achieving the security, stability, and prosperity. I'm very pleased that the interest to this initiative has grown considerably, which is manifested in large number of members of the Assembly joining the group. As of today, the group embraces 27 national delegations to the OECD. Dear colleagues, I'd like to inform you that because it is important to make a brief to the Standing Committee that we have, as already mentioned, widely discussions about the secret support group's formal status. As you know, that it is informal group. Mr. Lord Bonis also mentioned about that. We have two ways whether to continue as we are, either to become the official structure of the Assembly. As you know that in our bureau meeting, several times we have discussed it. Also, we discussed very broadly when we had the meeting of the group members on 3rd of June this year. At these meetings, we all agreed on the importance of keeping at the center of the Assembly's agenda the topic of Silk Road and connectivity, and also recognize the greatest need for the group to become an official structure, as I already mentioned. It could be in the format of ad hoc committee, so that this initiative can also enjoy the official support by International Secretariat and entire Assembly. In my view, establishing an ad hoc committee for connectivity based on the potential purposes and missions of the group would be an instrumental in advancing the OECP's efforts in the field of promoting connectivity, rebooting mutually beneficial economic ties, and stronger partnerships between participating states, with particular attention to the development of multimodal transport links and corridors, especially in the COVID-19 pandemic and post-pandemic period. This idea was also positively assessed by the member delegations attending the last online meeting. Dear friends, me and my colleagues from the secret support group would be happy to join the ad hoc committee and to further contribute to this initiative for connectivity. At the end, I'd like to express my firm belief that the Standing Committee can and should support and complement this initiative, providing an excellent platform for dialogue on broader issues of mutual interest and concerns of the member countries in line with the Rule 35 of the Rules of Procedure for OECP. So this is what I wanted to say. It is my opinion and my view on that issue. I think that in the February, when we will be able physically to come together in the Standing Committee, it is a prerogative of the President, of course, to put this issue to the agenda, and also it is a prerogative of the Standing Committee to adopt the appropriate solution or to make appropriate decisions. If not, of course, we will continue as informal with this main mission. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Guliev Diazai. Now I give the floor to Vice President Erickson from Norway. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I will be very brief. I support Lord Bonus in his points, both the rule of an adequate situation and what is a quorum. And I also support his ideas and thinking about working practices. I just want to also, and that's including the Silk Road Initiative as he was arguing for. I would just like to raise another question, as I am a member of the Rules Committee. And we have been discussing earlier the President's possibility to appoint special rapporteurs, and as I see now, also groups. And I do appreciate in a way the initiative to use the old members of the OSCE, because they have a lot of resources and they could be of tremendous value for the OSCE. So I'm very for it. But what I see is the gender perspective, because a formal group of former presidents is a powerful group. And it's almost only men. So I just want to raise the issue that if we are going to have that kind of groups as a supplementary groups in the OSCE, we have to consider how we can make it be gender balanced, because this is about power. We know it's about power, and it's about influence, how to make influence. So that is just my committee. And that brings me to my other point, because who is deciding which kind of groups we are having? I thought we would have a discussion about this in the Rules of Committee, and I would like to bring it on if it's not already there, because I think it's important that we have an agreement on where is the power to make these groups forming. And in my opinion, it would have been the Standing Committee or the Bureau. And then we would have to have the ordinary that the Secretariat would deliver pro and cons and some cases to us, how that we can decide it. And if we are going to take Hedy Fry's report on gender issues seriously, that must also be a consideration in this preparation for making these groups and these ad hoc groups and appointment of special rapporteurs. And I know it has been very gender balanced, the appointment of the special rapporteurs, but the principle is who is appointing them and where is that anchored in the formal settings of the OSCE. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Erickson. I will answer to your questions when I take the floor later on. And also this issue about this initiative of former president will be discussed under the next agenda item. So in terms of order, I will answer also to that point later on, but all your points will be answered to. Next speaker is Richard Dodson.
Thank you very much. And first, I'd like to thank Lord Bonus for his tremendous work on these very complicated issues. I think you've got some very good solutions that you put before us. More specifically on the Silk Road Support Group, I think this group advances the interest of a select group of countries among us. And if my dear friend Azay wishes to continue to have these meetings to discuss the Belt and Silk Road Initiative, I think they're free to do so. However, I agree with Lord Bonus that this discussion should not give the appearance of being under the official OSCE PA auspices. As parliamentarians of OSCE countries, we also need to remain faithful to the Helsinki Final Act's comprehensive definition of security to include respect for human rights. That definition binds our countries as signatories, but can and should be applied universally. I think any discussion pertaining to cooperation with China should give a high profile to issues of concerns to us, such as threats by China to the security of participating states but more specifically to the human rights abuses by China, namely the draconian new security law for Hong Kong or Beijing's persecution of the country's Uyghur minority. For that reason, I think the solution to the current position we have of the support group's relationship with the OSCE may not be, the solution may not be found in making it an official ad hoc group of this assembly. At a minimum, the mandate would have to reflect the concerns of a broader range of participating states, like the ad hoc groups on migration and counterterrorism do. I mean, an official ad hoc group also needs to have wide membership among participating states. As a final point, ad hoc committees do add work to the Secretariat, who already has a large workload, and I think that's fine and worth doing, and something we can work through. But I think it's just something we need to consider as we sort of weigh how we want to proceed with this group. Thank you. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Richard. And the next speaker is Icon Yoram from Armenia. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Roberto. I'll be very brief. I just want to express my full support for the rules of procedure of OSCE, and I also would like to apologize for this emotional debate and playing game. I already said that I have to respond to some allegations when our colleague from Azerbaijan made. So I want to say that we would like to have our added value to broader agenda of OSCE. We have different ideas, we have different subjects, and we would like to share with OSCE, and we don't want to engage to this blame game and to take the extra time of and to hinder the regular work of our forum. So that's why I call my colleagues that to stop that allegation and to start to really to have debate in really constructive way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your constructive statement this time. And now I give the floor to Vice President Vigenin. Christian, you have the floor. Christian, are you connected? Vice President Vigenin. I don't see him on the list of. Yes, he is. Christian, go ahead. Yeah, we see you, but we don't hear you. Get the microphone closer now. No, no sound. I mean, you're visible, but there is no sound. Now you're muted. This should be okay, but probably you have to. Yeah, now it's trouble. You have to probably near. I think the connection of your phone with your earplugs needs to be. No, we don't hear you. I can hear some sound now, but why don't you try to remove your earplugs and just speak into the. Maybe that's the problem.
Can you hear me
now we hear you. Yes, perfect. Go ahead.
I don't hear you very well, but okay.
We hear you. Go ahead. We hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Just two remarks. Of course, I support the work that has been done by the Rules of Procedure Committee. Again, I would like to propose that maybe they can consider adding some rules regarding the work of the Assembly online via this. I mean, just to make sure that sometimes if we take decisions online, which might be necessary also in the future, this can be arranged somehow in the rules. I'm not sure I'm very clear, but we need to make sure that even if we don't meet in person, we can still be able to take decisions, and we can further develop this platform of even voting when necessary. Second issue, it's regarding this Silk and Road Initiative. As I mentioned last time, of course I support the work of this initiative. It's complementing our activities, that's fine. But I am not ready to support transforming this initiative as an ad hoc working group of the Assembly itself, because it means that we somehow fully endorse the work that is being done or will be done in the future. I think rather we might consider creating a status in our rules of such type of initiatives, being it informal working groups, whatever we call them, but not to put them at the level of ad hoc committee, because ad hoc committees have special role in our assembly. So in that sense, we can provide rules which would allow also in the future such initiatives to be kind of registered as part of the work of our assembly, but the assembly cannot have full responsibility of the content of this work. Creating such a status, we can create some rules or some requirements of such work, such initiatives to be registered, like, for example, number of delegations that should participate in order to be eligible, so that they can have certain representativity, some issues related to the topic of such initiatives. But again, if the majority would support being it ad hoc committee, it's better than what we have now. But again, ad hoc committee for me is something which is part of the core work of our assembly as a structure. That is why I'm not sure that Silk and Road initiative should be ad hoc committee. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Vigenin. Dear Christian, we heard you perfectly. So I will conclude this agenda item by giving you a few points from the Secretariat's perspective. I mentioned it during my report and I would speak now. I fully support Lord Bones's initiative, triggered also by the OSCPA President, George Saratelli, on a comprehensive review of our rules. As Lord Bones mentioned, our rules have been in place since 1993. They need general review. Also to put in line a little bit the rules with the practices that we have been developing throughout these years. If you see in our rules, there is no mention of the Vienna Liaison Office, though from 2003 we've had Ambassador Notella in Vienna and a very active office in Vienna, I would say one of the most active institutions in Vienna, together with other OSCE institutions. The office has become a kind of an institution in itself, so we need to absolutely have that in our new rules. Issues of election observation, today it was mentioned about fake observers or not. We do not have in our rules any mention, any paragraph about election observation. I'm not imagining that in the new rule there should be an entire decalogue that was adopted last year on all the rules, but at least a reference, a general reference on the rules that we have on election observation. There is somebody's Angelica, can you mute? Angelica, can you mute BH? Yeah, that's yeah, thank you. Then in terms of other aspects that should be dealt through the rule is the International Secretariat. The entire International Secretariat is dealt in the rules only with a very small paragraph that just simply talks about how you elected the Secretary General, how you appoint the Deputy Secretary Generals and elected the Deputy Secretary Generals, and that's it. There is nothing else about financial rules, staff rules. I think also there should be a more comprehensive rule that puts the entire Secretariat in a more stable position. Basically now it says the Secretary General is all powerful and decides everything. I think the rules, the new rules should be a little bit more in line with other international organizations. The terms of office of the President, we've seen exceptional circumstances like this one require that also there are some issues, as Christian Megan mentioned, of online provisions or other kind of provisions that help us deal with the exceptional situations. So I will not go throughout the entire rules menu now, but I think a comprehensive review of the rules should be dealt with. Ambassador Notella, who is our legal advisor, has been and has a long experience also in the Bundestag on rules, has been asked to come up with a general review that I and Gustavo Pagliares will review sometimes in September, and then we will present it as a, let's say, proposal from the International Secretariat to Lord Bonas and to the President's ad hoc working group and the Rules Committee to trigger this reform process, which of course will have to follow the current rules. So any change on the current rules requires a decision of the Standing Committee. This is also to answer to Kari Erickson. No rule will change unless the Standing Committee by consensus says, yes, these are our new rules. So we'll have to sort of present a new set of rules, and then the Standing Committee by consensus, so all delegations have to agree that this will be the new rule book of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. From my side, there is full support for a, let's say, an OSCPA 2.0, let's say a real more modernized OSCPA with also its rules in place. And thank you very much, Lord Bonas and Ambassador Notele, for your work on this. On the issue of the Silk Road Group, I would like to simply clarify that we are not envisaging a simple transformation. Let's take this group and let's make it an official ad hoc working group of the PA. This is not what we are thinking of. I think the PA should first and foremost decide whether the issue of relations with China and connectivity are issues that should be mainly dealt with within the Assembly, where all the members are represented. I remember in Bratislava, the Bureau meeting several times said we have to discuss China, we have to debate relations with China, and this cannot be a prerogative only of a private group, an initiative of few members. It should be the issue of the Assembly, of the structures of the Assembly. So if the Assembly decides that indeed these issues are not necessarily the Silk Road, but the initiatives of relations with China, connectivity, future technologies, G5, I don't know, the mandate will be decided. And the Assembly, through its Standing Committee, so Kari, this is the reply, it's not anybody who decides, it's the Standing Committee. The Standing Committee will decide, yes, there is an ad hoc group that deals with these issues, and then we'll see what to call it, connectivity, relations, whatever, G5. We will see the mandate and the name of the ad hoc group, but it will be the Standing Committee, the final decision maker. There will be no other decision maker, not the President, not the Secretary General, not the Bureau, only the Standing Committee by consensus. We've already heard from Richard Hudson and Beginning words of opposition to the creation of this. So if the status of play in February, when we will bring this to the Standing Committee, is such that this group will not be adopted. That's why it's very important to prepare it, and that everybody who has concerns about what is it this group about, is it simply a Zai's initiative, sugar-coated and transformed into an official body of the PA. So if this is what delegations will feel, they will say, no, we don't want this. So that's why it needs to be seriously prepared. All concerns have to be addressed. And once all the delegations are happy with what is proposed, then they might or they might not give their consensus in the Standing Committee. So that's the formula. There is no decision that can be made outside the statutory bodies, which is the Standing Committee in terms of new bodies established. But on the present group, Kari, you asked about this initiative of former presidents, and this is something totally detached from the OSCE PA, International Secretary, and this PA. This is a private initiative, I would say, that President Saratelli, and it will be dealt in the next points. I don't want to preempt Ambassador Notele from presenting it, but it's a private initiative of the President, who has called former presidents, including a woman, Christine Mutonen, who happens to be, unfortunately, the only woman together with Eledine in '98 to be elected president. But it will not be just a body of former presidents, an association of former members. But anyway, Ambassador Notele will treat it, so I don't want to preempt his discussion, and we can have a discussion on that next agenda item. So I hope I've answered these 2 points. Main body decision-making is the Standing Committee. No changes in the PA rules unless the Standing Committee agrees, be it for the reforms that Lord Bonas will present, or be it for the ad hoc working group on connectivity, or what we call it, which is kind of a dissolution of the Silk Road group now. So I now give the floor to Ambassador Notele to treat the next point on the agenda. Andreas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I understand that I now have to speak on several points, but I will start by speaking about what is going on in Vienna. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for giving me the opportunity to update you or to update the Standing Committee on Events in Vienna and the work of the Liaison Office. Time is very short. I've understood that there's no more interpretation either. So it was probably a good idea that I sent out, or that you sent out my report last week, which contains most of the information that I wanted to give to you. And some issues have already been touched upon by speakers today. The president himself has started about speaking about these heads of institutions. So I will skip many of the details and much of what I wanted to say in the interest of time. But for those who have not been able to digest what I wrote last week and the things that came before, I want to repeat that the best news we received in May was that after many months of discussions, the OSCE Permanent Council in Vienna finally found a consensus on the 2020 unified budget, more than 5 months after the deadline for its adoption had expired, and of course, already considerably into the year. The budget was adopted, as was the separate budget of the Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine, but it drew the usual criticism regarding unfulfilled national requests, criticism which is then often spelled out in so-called interpretative statements that the national delegations deliver after the adoption of the budget, and in particular, in this case, it regarded the continued absence of an agreement on new scales of contributions. This issue, which has been discussed again and again, including here in the Standing Committee, will stay with us and fuel tensions between participating states. In this context, I will only mention one, but I can also send out my report, this oral report, to everybody, then you can see all the other points again. In this context, France underlined that 17 participating states finance 90% of the budget, which they regard as unfair, demonstrating the need for better distribution. The OSCE budget without the separate budget for the SMM now is at 138.2 million euros, which means 3.1 less than proposed. It also means that the zero nominal growth policy, which amounts to an annually shrinking budget, is maintained despite repeated criticism by the OSCE EPA. Just as a comparison, at the time when I began in Vienna, which admittedly was some time ago, the budget was over 200 million euros. This means project funding will have to continue to rely on extra budgetary funds, which have been decreasing equally and are even more uncertain in times of economic uncertainty. Now, the pandemic and the freezing of activities have certainly brought about some savings in certain areas, but the expectation that this will result in real savings is treacherous. For instance, the ODIHR had to deploy less EOMs than usually in the first part of the year, but in autumn, all those elections that were postponed will take place in parallel to those that were already scheduled. More EOMs in parallel will put an additional strain on human resources, and so will the safety measures that need to be put in place. But I can, of course, not speak for the ODIHR. There's little hope that the adoption of next year's budget will be any easier than this year, especially since this will be in the framework of the financial impact of the current economic crisis on public budgets. In this context, no consensus has been found on the extension of the most senior positions in the OSCE, Secretary General, ODIHR Director, High Commissioner on National Minorities, and Representative on the Freedom of the Media. These positions had been filled 3 years ago during the OSCE chairmanship, Austrian OSCE chairmanship, following an agreement at the informal ministerial council meeting in Mauerbach as a package, and they will expire on July 18. Many delegations would have liked to see a smooth extension process in order to avoid additional complications during the pandemic. However, Azerbaijan and Tajikistan have formally objected to the extension of Harlem Desir, the current representative on the freedom of the media, thereby opening the package and requesting a vacancy procedure. Tajikistan also added objections against the extension of the mandate of Ingeborg Gisladottir and, more in general, concerns regarding the regional balance of leadership of the institutions. Also, Turkey revealed objections against this year's extension. There's also a debate mainly between Western countries about the current OECD Secretary General. This is where a particularity of the working methods under the pandemic come into play. Obstacles to in-person negotiations do not make it easier to find consensus on this issue, which would, even under normal circumstances, put a heavy strain on any chairmanship. Since 5 p.m. today, there is a preparatory committee, if it hasn't been cancelled, that is taking place in Vienna, which is supposed to deal with this issue, and we will hear after this meeting what came out of it. The first social activities are currently being organized, sometimes under blatant disregard for basic safety measures, but the main problem that remains under the pandemic is that the normal way in which diplomatic negotiations take place through person-to-person interaction is severely obstructed. Now, for technical reasons, all these meetings are even less personal than those of the PA, because all participants remain muted, with cameras turned off, until it is their turn to make a statement. Already in normal times, the meetings here are everything but interactive, but at least it is possible to see mimics and gestures and detect some reactions to the statements made. Now, this is here impossible. My colleagues and I feel that this has made the rhetoric between participating states, especially those that are engaged in conflicts, more aggressive. This is further fueled by actions on the ground. For instance, the heavy increase in ceasefire violations in Ukraine, direct attacks on SMM assets and patrols, postponement of the next Normandy 4 summit, continuous borderization in Georgia, increased tensions between Azerbaijan and Armenia, as well as some developments in the Western Balkans and the Eastern Mediterranean. We have heard from the Ukrainian delegation today about the particular situation in Ukraine, where there is a discussion that the current situation might lead to a dividing up of the areas in which the SMM can operate, which cannot be sustained by the mission. And this is frustrating for many. Certainly, the lack of traditional in-person diplomacy and the particularities of video-transmitted statements have contributed to this development. There have also been verbal attacks on heads of field presences, which I haven't heard before, and disagreements over, for instance, the participation of a former NATO official as keynote speaker, or the presence of a NATO liaison officer at FOC meetings, also again in a tone which I'm not used to. Atmospherically, it accounts for a climate which is even less constructive than usual. The fact that the OSCE has nevertheless found consensus on a limited number of mostly routine decisions does not eliminate concerns that the organization is going through another severe crisis. In fact, one very experienced ambassador told me recently, last week, that he expects the organization to die in the near future. I just wanted to mention that. It's not just somebody. The Albanian chairmanship has organized an ambassadorial retreat next week, which I will attend. This will hopefully be an opportunity to get a better feeling of where we're heading to. On a positive note, the OSCE and its heightened activity, mainly through webinars and online committee meetings, as well as its public statements and pronouncements, have been very well noted by the OSCE community. There has been a strong interest in these meetings, as expressed by participation from Vienna, from the capitals, from the institutions and the missions. And from the start of the pandemic, the PA's liaison office has continued to function both by telecommuting, participation in online meetings, and through physical presence under specific safety measures in the office and in the Hofburg. Office staff has also taken the lead in the organization of several PA meetings and webinars. Some safety measures taken in the Hofburg and some of the atmospherical developments of the OSCE have had repercussions also on our work. But the staff has performed extremely well, and I would like to use the opportunity to express my gratitude to all of them for their dedication. So far, for this part. Now, should I immediately go to the other things, which I can really deal with very shortly, I think, very briefly?
Yes, Ambassador, very quickly.
Just one point regarding, you probably hear this music, which is our interpretation system, which I unfortunately pulled off the plug here, and now it's playing music all the time. I don't know how to really stop it. I can turn it down. Very briefly on the issue of the rules of procedure. Of course, when I undertake my tasking, I will take all these things that have been mentioned today and then at other opportunities into consideration. I can tell you that it is much more than we discussed. I personally have a 10-point agenda, so to speak, for this reform of the rules of procedure, which I will not read out now, but for the sake of time, but you will be able to see, if you see it, that it contains all the things that you have also raised. Now, coming to the timeline for a project of a panel of former OSCE presidents and an association of former OSCE PA members, as Roberta has rightly said, by its own, it's a private initiative. Anyone who is a former member of the Parliamentary Assembly could get together with 2 or 3 others, or less even in some countries, and form an association of former OSCE members, and we would then have to see how to deal with it. But here we have a very serious initiative, which has been taken by former OSCE presidents and was kind of formalized on the 29th of April, where they established themselves to act as founders and an organizing committee for a fully fledged association. In the meeting, they agreed that all panel members are called upon to explore ways on their own national and an international level, for possible partnerships with existing organizations and/or project funding and donations. The seat of the association should be in Vienna. Its status that of a private non-profit association under Austrian law, autonomous as an organization, but having a special relationship with the OSCE. The responsibility for creating the association and organizing it remains exclusively with its prospective members. By the way, this sentence comes from other associations of that nature, including the EP and the Council of Europe, where it's also done that way. The panel should retain a special status within the association, which should also include a body made up of former senior members of the PA. This is where also women come in. So it's, I think the structure, and I'm very mindful of that, also when I'm thinking about a statute for the organization, that we will make it as broad as possible. The project should be formally presented to the OSCE Standing Committee during the winter meeting next year, with the purpose of establishing a formal relationship with the OSCE, and then it's entirely in the hands of the Standing Committee whether or not they want to accept such a cooperation and how it should be structured. And in the meantime, steps should be taken to draft a statute, assure the necessary prerequisites for its registration in Austria, and ideas should be collected for possible first project. Next steps will then be the information of the Austrian Parliament and Austrian delegation, maybe a webinar end of September 2020, a Facebook group of former members, which has already been created and is currently in a test phase. And the panel is planning to adopt a statute in October, November, and then request registration by the Austrian authorities. The first formal report about this will then be to the OSCE Bureau meeting in Tirana in December 2020, with proposals for the relationship with the OSCE, so that the Bureau can make its own proposal to the 2021 winter meeting on the conditions of cooperation and assistance to the association. That's it. I hope I was brief enough for the progress and time.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Excellent. We have 2 speakers on this agenda point, and then, of course, I will also speak at the end. Azai Guliev, you have the floor. Azai Guliev, yes, we don't hear you. You have to unmute. You're still muted. Yes, now it's good. Go ahead.
Sorry. Dear Roberto, thank you for giving the floor. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to Andres Matera for his tremendous job. It is very much appreciated that he keep us informed about the discussions going on in PC, and of course it is very important that the PA is engaged in certain type of discussions in the executive branch. So, dear Roberto, as you know that after your request, I had several discussions with the high level of officials from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as from the permanent representative of Azerbaijan in Vienna, about the issue concerning the media, the mandate of the media representative. If you don't mind, I'd like to very briefly inform about the conclusions that we have discussed. First of all, Azerbaijan expressing its readiness to join consensus on reappointment for the next terms of the Secretary General. By the way, I see Mr. Greeningo here. I welcome him and greet him. Really, we had very great cooperation with Secretary General. I hope that this cooperation will be continued for others for the next term. Also, we do much appreciate the work of the Director of ODIHR and the High Commissioner for National Minorities. Of course, three of them are full support of Azerbaijan. But unfortunately, due to the lack of consensus within the OCPA on extension of the mandate of current representatives on the freedom of the media, Azerbaijan called upon the Albanian chairmanship to open the vacancy procedure and invite the governments of the participating states to nominate new candidates for the above-mentioned post without further delay. It should be noted that the position of my country on the representative on the freedom of the media is an issue of personality, not a mandate. Azerbaijan is ready to engage in constructive dialogue on implementation of human dimension commitments with all the OEC executive structures in non-politicized and result-oriented manner according to their respective mandates. I would like to also emphasize that Azerbaijan is satisfied with cooperation with ODIHR, and we do not shy away from discussing openly all challenging issues and shortcomings, including the criticism from this institution, and looking forward to expanding our close cooperation with ODIHR in upholding our democratic commitments. However, as far as representative on the freedom of media is concerned, we regret that over the past 3 years, this vision hasn't been fully materialized, and unfortunately, on many occasions, the cooperative dialogue mechanisms built in the mandate of the media representatives wasn't fully utilized. Instead, the activities of the representatives turned mostly into the finger-pointing exercise, focusing solely on the same participating states while passing in silence during developments in other member countries, in particular in our region. And finally, I'd like to express that is ready to cooperate with the next representative on freedom of the media with a view to reaching our shared objective to strengthen the implementation of relevant OEC principles and commitments, as well as to improve the effectiveness of concerted action by the participating states based on our common values. Dear Roberto, this is what I wanted to share with the member of the Standing Committee. This is the position of official Baku. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice President Guliev Dirazai, and I give the floor to Lord Bones on this point. Your microphone, Lord Bones. Yep, no, it's good.
Thank you. Thank you, Roberto, and thank you, Ambassador Notere. I just want to raise a couple of points arising out of our previous discussion and the discussion on the previous item. First of all, I'm very grateful to Andreas for not listing in detail the 10 issues with which he's going to bless the Rules Committee. I think we may find that quite something to take on board. But just at the end of this meeting, can I just make clear in my own mind what we have actually agreed, because I think it's important that we know this before we go away. I judge from the contributions, and I judge from those contributions on the chat line, that we are A, agreed that the rules review goes ahead. We are B, agreed that there will be a report to the subcommittee, to the standing committee on an ad hoc group on China issues or issues as defined. C, that and I didn't hear any disagreement on this, that the existing group will not continue to describe itself as an OSCE-PA organization, that we'll have a report to the Standing Committee on preparing an executive summary for annual declaration of the annual declaration, and we will also explore the possibility of the committee's meeting during the autumn meeting. I just think those are the things which I get from the discussion. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouths or suggest they've agreed something they haven't agreed, but that is what I will take away from this meeting unless I hear anything to the contrary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lord Bones. Vice President Kari Erickson.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Andreas, for your report. I'm just a bit confused about the group of the ex-presidents, because as I understand it, you have to correct me if it's right or wrong, there is now been an effort to form some procedures or rules regarding this group, which in due time then will come back to the standing committee, so that the standing committee could say yes or no to if we want it. But as I can hear, as I understand it, that somebody in OSCE is already working on this with this group. And my point is just that what should become first or second, in my opinion, just to be frank, I think the standing committee should first take a principal point whether we should have a formal ex-president group. Okay. Because now there has been some discussions, and there are preparing some rules and procedures that the standing committee should say yes or no to. So it's my question is just, and maybe I'm just very rules in my head, but I just think it's important to be very clear what is the OSCE's both secretariat and the politicians issue. Where is the drive from these two? Because if it is the practice that we can, any of us can ask someone, it would be great with, for instance, a women's group, and we organize it as a group, not in regarding to OSCE, and then afterwards we go to OSCE and ask, would you please recommend this group in the OSCE? I just think it's, in my head, there is something wrong with the time schedule when we politicians are involved in it. Thank you.
Roberto, I'm very sorry. So we are coming to the end now. You'd like to respond now, and then maybe I will.
You will, of course, have the last word, Mr. President. I am just going to answer to these points that Ambassador Notel has raised, and also some of the questions that he has received. Of course, he can reply as well. And then I will give you the floor to conclude basically on this point and on all the points. Is that okay? Yeah? All right. So first of all, on the discussions about the OSCE, Ambassador Notel used the very dramatic words of some ambassadors saying at the end of the year the OSCE will no longer be existing. Of course, this is very concerning. Here we're talking about, and some of you know, the positions of Secretary General, Freedom of the Media, ODIHR Director, and High Commissioner for National Minorities, the former Secretary General Lamberto Zannier. These four positions were elected in 2017. You remember in Minsk we had 4 empty chairs. They couldn't agree at that time already to find a compromise to appoint these people. So for 6 months in 2017, we didn't have institutions of the OSCE, and it was a very shaky situation within the OSCE. Then finally there was a consensus. They found this package deal of these 4 individuals: Thomas Greminger, Lamberto Zannier, Gisela Todir, and Arlem Desir, Freedom of the Media representative. Now, these positions come to an end on the 17th of July this year. In the OSCE, it works by consensus. So if one country says, I don't want this person, that person will not be renewed, unfortunately. The OSCPA historically has always said that when it comes to appointment of heads of independent institution, in order to make them even more independent, there should not be a consensus, because if you put in the middle the consensus, then of course a country can blackmail you and say, well, if you're not good towards my country, I will not give you my consensus. We would rather advocate that at least for these positions, there is a secret ballot with a special majority of 2/3, kind of how we do for the OSCPA Secretary General. There is no consensus to appoint me. I would not be Secretary General because in 2015, 3 voted against. In last year, 2019, 2 voted against. So according to the OSCE rules, I would never be Secretary General. But there was a secret ballot. You had a candidate, and the members by themselves, individually, they said, okay, this person can do the job. I will give him or her my support. Unfortunately, in the OSCE, there is the role of consensus, which, in my opinion, weakens these institutions because it doesn't give them the full autonomy which they deserve. Now, we do not meddle in this discussion, of course. I mean, this is a prerogative of the governmental side. It's the ambassadors in Vienna and the directors, political directors in the capitals, and ultimately the foreign ministers who decide who they want for these 4 positions. What we can do, and of course I am in touch with my 4 colleagues all the time, I will see them again online on Thursday. What we can do from our side, from the Parliamentary Assembly side, is to maybe urge our foreign ministers to really get engaged in this. Because what Ambassador Notella said is if there is no interest of the political level in the OSCE, of course the OSCE will become more and more irrelevant. But here we have 323 parliamentarians who have connections in their countries, who have a lot of leverages towards their government and towards their public opinion. So you can make the OSCE relevant, not the OSCPA. The OSCPA is relevant and we are happy with what we do, but here we're talking about general organization. So you can kind of save the organization by, after this meeting, calling up your foreign minister and say, look, are you paying enough attention to this? Are you instructing your ambassador to maybe do something about the appointment, because we need the 4 heads of institutions to be fully in their mandates and fully operational. So it's the level of the influence that this organization will have will depend proportionally on the level of interest that there is from foreign ministers. And the level of interest of foreign ministers can be triggered by you also kind of putting the fire on them. So that's, I tell you, in a very informal manner, as I just did with Elona, who left this meeting and went to see Prime Minister Rama, whom I suggested also to get the situation in his hand, as he is the chairman in office. The only way to save the organization is to get the foreign ministers of your respective countries involved and focus on that. Do not forget, as I said at the previous meeting, the budget that Ambassador Notella just mentioned was approved after a year of negotiations, because they started in July this year, last year, and only was approved, should have been approved by 31st of December. Last December, it was only approved 6 months later in the year. But the budget is a budget of 138.2 million. This is what we're talking about, 138.2 million, which is 1 day of the US contribution for the war in Afghanistan. 1 day. 1 day in Afghanistan is 1 year of the entire OSCE, freedom of the media, OSCE Secretary General, and all these things. You know, so just to give you a sense of also what we are talking about financially. So what we need you to tell your foreign ministers is finance this organization, focus on the organization participating in its meeting, because the organization does good work, if you think so. If you don't think so, of course, refrain from doing that intervention. That's all I have to say in terms of the OSCE institutions, but I hope that there will be soon consensus and good news coming from there. In the terms of the questions from Kari Erickson on this association of former members, I want to be extremely clear on this, because you have requested clarifications on that. Here, we're talking about an initiative of President Saratelli, who is or was about to leave the position of president today, by the way, and thought in all these meetings that we had with many leaders and former leaders, and you're part of this informal WhatsApp chat so that we have, so many members want to feel involved. He felt, how can we keep this interest of all former members who want to participate into some kind of a more structured form besides just a WhatsApp chat. You know, members want to participate. By the way, what Michael Link said before about fake observers, many of our former members have kind of been lured into going into observing elections because they would like to remain active and they don't have a platform where to be active. So what was thought by President Tsereteli is, let's first of all include all the former presidents up to some years, 15 years ago. And let's get together. And they had an informal chat, which I participated also as an observer, let's say, to this chat. And it was discussed there, why don't we do what the Council of Europe, what the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, of the European Parliament have, which is a simple association of former members. So they themselves said, we would like to form an association of former members. And the position of the International Secretariat is that if private citizens want to organize themselves, they can certainly do so. There is nothing that I will prevent them from doing. But of course, there is zero, and this I underline, financial implication from the OSCE Secretariat. The OSCE Secretariat has nothing to do with this. And the OSCE Secretariat, the OSCPA Secretariat, sorry, has nothing to do in terms of creating any structures which are not approved by the Standing Committee. The only contribution that the OSCPA Secretariat has given to this association is, let's say, the intelligence of Ambassador Notelle, who in his free time has helped those members come up with a statute, come up with a kind of internal statute that they have to prepare. But they will meet by themselves. If they come up with some proposal to the OSCPA, it will come to the Standing Committee of the OSCPA, sometimes in the winter, and then if they want to have a relationship with the OSCPA. But they can create an association of former members that can live without the OSCPA International Secretariat having anything to rule against. So I just wanted to be clear. The role of the OSCE International Secretariat is none apart from Ambassador Notelle's contribution in terms of intelligentsia, let's say. And we will, as OSCPA, interact with this group once and if it's formed, when it will approach us through our statutory bodies. I hope I've answered your questions. And I now give the floor to President Tsereteli.
Thank you. Thank you. I was in silence quite a long time. I listened to everything, everybody, and thank you, Roberto, for taking this burden. Also, the sharing this burden today. I think, and I will be very, let's say, short. First of all, thank you, Lord Bonis, for your very precise proposals, which will work together, and thank you for your cooperation. I think all initiatives that we are proposing today are important, starting with a comprehensive revision of our rules and procedures, which was also was some idea which I also had, because when we saw and we experienced what pandemic brought and with challenges we have, I think we have to respond to this and to be prepared better for maybe next time's different occasions, the similar ones. We don't want that, but we have to be ready not to have another questions. Another one was about the executive summary and all this more rationalizing, let's say, documents, which for that, if you remember in Bratislava, I also offered that it could be, mandatory for the committees, for the rapporteurs and others to have also short summaries of their work, which also Lord Bonis today informed us. And I think it will simplify then the final goal to have this executive summary of all our documents, which is, I think, is a good idea. And about other things which we will discuss when we meet in person for the Standing Committee. And about, I think it's quite clear with the Silk and Road, as I endorsed, first of all, to change the name. We agree on that. And then to institutionalize this one and to have let's say, sort of committee, ad hoc committee that came up as an idea from others, not from the group. I mean, I think they could continue as a working group, but that was idea to create another group. But it's, again, I think it's quite clear it's a matter of a decision finally of the Standing Committee. And then we will accordingly proceed with this. I'd like also to express my gratitude to Ambassador Notele for his work and liaison office and all the office. They are very active and they are very productive, I would say, and it's a great link to executive branch. And Andreas Notele is helping us in many other fields too. Roberto already explained with the institutions. I will not say anything on that, but to wish that it will finalize very soon, that all the people who I guess are very good partners for the Parliamentary Assembly that will be reappointed. And finally, as questions have been raised on this, I think a very good initiative, not just because it is my initiative. I think it will be discussed many times before. Main idea, dear Kari, is that as far as you mentioned about this, and I was a little bit surprised, you know, you portrayed a little bit like somebody wants to make something another powerhouse. No. First of all, I'd like to just explain that all these people who are former presidents, dear Kari, they are not somebodies who came for 2 or 3 months in the assembly or 6 months. Those people contributed a lot for this assembly. They, with other members, with other leaders, they built this organization. And we are starting with Elsie Hastings, who was with us, and with the remarkable people, you know, in their countries, like Goran Lenmark, like Petro Septimiou, like Joao Soares, like, I don't know, Christine Mouton, and others, and a few of them. And I think these people, first of all, they deserve to be respected. They deserve to take part, if they want, in activities of the Parliamentary Assembly, as of course as a former members, and not the people who have any power here. And I think it's fair, and maybe one day, years after, if it's a matter of gender, we understand that at this moment, this is a composition. After a few years, it could be a different composition. But I guess that the idea is important for the assembly. It's important for the, I would say, more coherence of our assembly, to respect our former members. And we started with the presidents because during my quite a long presidency, I got many times advices from them. And then I thought that why not to somehow make like an advisory board, which will be on the one hand the respect of these people, and other is very useful for our assembly. And I think this idea should be supported, and everybody who knew that, they are supported. When it comes to any other contribution, Roberto was very clear in that nobody's asking about contribution. There will be, if this association will be functional, and there will be a lot of women there, believe me, in the association of former members, and if it's a gender, and I think that should have this association should have a special relations with the Parliamentary Assembly, and that we will define through maybe bilateral cooperation agreement, whatever. But it's a future steps. We are just starting. What will be a good idea? How to support Parliamentary Assembly by all this. All the expertise or other knowledge that these people they have. So that's it. It's only, I think, the main idea and the gist of this concept. And I'd like to thank all former members, former presidents who agreed to take part in these activities. And Roberto said rightly, that's a private initiative, but not to mess these people with all of others. Because these people, they deserve maybe more respect than, as I said, I have respect to all of them, but sometimes I see former members who've been a few months in the assembly and then disappeared. And these people contributed a lot to this organization that we are now sometimes proud of our the achievements or boasting that we did this and that. And those people, the former president, all of them, they contributed a lot. So I think we will develop this idea. Of course, everything will be very transparent. And we are now, let's say, operating based on existing rules of procedure. if, and it's not a standing committee who is deciding over, for instance, the initiatives of former members. No, the standing committee could decide over financial aid or a common project with this association, which I guess it will be beneficial for all the assembly if it could happen in future, but not at this moment. So I think I'd like to ask all of you, and I know that many of you supported this idea, if there are any questions. So we will ask it, we will answer it in the coming maybe months, not today everything. But I think that's will be very tangible project. You will see if it will happen, to develop, it will be very important and, as I said, useful for the system. So I guess we had an interesting discussion today. I already partly responded to many issues raised here. Once again, thank you very much for being, you know, such a long time at the screen and taking part and being engaged actively and raising questions, raising issues. I think this is very important. And of course, as finally in his remarks, Lord Boris said, we are very clearly supported at this standing committee, which is appeared not informal. It's appeared the event which became quite formal. And thank you very much for supporting the ideas which we offered. And one wish, which is always with us, the time of pandemic, that to meet each other as soon as possible in person. And I'd like to wish all of you good health and to see, you know, recovery in the world in all directions, and to be safe and to see each other frequently again. So thank you very much. Thank you, Roberto, to your staff and everybody who's been together, member and participant of this standing committee. So I think we have to close now.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think Kari Erickson, I just ask quickly to make a remark before we close, and then you can reclose.
Yeah.
Kari.
Thank you very much. I would just like to underline and to stress that I have full respect for all the former presidents. And I think they have done, every one of them, a very good job, and they have been important for the development of the OSCE. Let there be no doubt about that, however. My questions was of purely formal character. What was the process in this matter? That was all I was asking for, and I have got it. And if I am agree with it, I will discuss it in the former standing committee in the rules of procedures. But I just want to underline, don't let it be an impression that I don't respect the former presidents. I really do. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this clarification. Dear Kari, I did not say anything. I just said as a general remark that these people should be respected, and it was driver of my initiative, nothing more. Thank you for your support.
No, thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Kari. I'm happy that you say you've received the formal explanation what was the procedure. So I hope I have answered your question. I think, dear friends, this concludes our meeting. I mean, we've had a very good, almost 4 hours discussion, but we've covered all the points. By the end of this week, you will see this document. This is the front page of it. This is, nobody has seen it, not even the president, which is his paper, but I'm just showing you. So it will be something like this. This is the front page. And there will be some photos, and then we will make something more with photos and a brochure later on. But this is more like a policy paper. So there is a nice cover, but then there is a lot of content in the end, and it will come out sometimes between tomorrow and Friday.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Enjoy.
Goodbye.
Okay.
Good health to everybody.